Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2020. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, South Carolina debate, a crap show, which according to the Insta polls apparently helped Bernie Sanders. Meanwhile, White House in panic mode over the stock market's reaction to coronavirus. Meanwhile, everyone else a little bit more concerned about the White House failure to respond to the actual virus. Polls show Bernie and Biden now tied in Texas. That is Joe Biden's second firewall. Polls also show Sanders leads amongst African Americans, which was Biden's first firewall. Amazon doing its best to curb mask price gouging in the anticipation of coronavirus hitting the states. And Supreme Court okays border guards shooting children across the border. Clyburn endorses Biden in South Carolina. Modi starts building detention camps. That should end well. And a 5-year, $100 million NSA program yielded one serious or even remotely serious investigation. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. You know, I headlined this yesterday, but did not get to talk about it, and I probably will. There's going to be a couple of votes that McConnell's taking. We're not sure exactly when those votes are scheduled, but they're starting to discuss them in the Senate. Part of Operation, this is part of the culture war aspect of the election in the fall, you know, and really part and parcel of the over 180 judges that Trump has now placed on the federal judiciary. We will begin to see the implications of this go, for decades. The other day, I can't remember what was the case that went to the D.C. Circuit, but one of the judges on the 3-bank panel that I think it was the Medicaid work requirements. One of the judges that quashed the work requirements was appointed by Jimmy Carter. So just imagine that, but in reverse. From these enormous amount of judges that Donald Trump has put on the federal judiciary, and he still has another year, essentially, to do it, presuming he loses in November. And that's a big presumption. Incumbents do have advantages. All right, let's talk a little bit about the debate. We did do a wrap-up of the debate, which you can find on YouTube. We'll do a little bit more now. We have clips, obviously, from last night. It really was a disaster. I should say, if you were watching last night, you saw me admonish my son, Saul, to go to bed. At one point, he's had a little trouble going to bed as of late. He did go. He had some comments about the debate that maybe I'll share a little bit later.
Oh my God, I can't wait.
He thought it was pretty funny. He thought Bernie was older than he thought, and he thought he looked like Joe Biden. but then he also got very confused and thought that the people on stage could actually hear us when we were talking. So,
Easy mistake to make.
yeah, well, he was punished for that.
It's page 1.
They can't. What's wrong with you?
Just a reminder,
You have a
folks.
Jewish tradition to keep up.
The AM Quickie is available at amquickie.com. Check it out. We have had what percentage? Is it a 50% bump in a month? We've had a 50% bump in listenership. So if you are not one of those people, you are making a mistake. People are finding it very, very useful, particularly in this day and age. Just keep up on the news. We should have put it in the feed when we were on vacation. That was a big mistake on our part, but forgive us. So here is how, this is clip number 1, correct? Yep. Michael Bloomberg, I think, was probably the biggest loser in this debate. To the extent that there was a loser, I would say that it was Michael Bloomberg. I think a lot of people did not win. I don't know that anybody won. And in that situation, you're in like a four-corner situation in basketball, and the person in the lead wins. And I think that's why, some of the polls right after the debate showed Bernie got the advantage there, because I think on some level it's like people went in, and he was obviously leading in the polls. And I think people came out and said that I have no reason to believe that anything's different. And I think that's probably what happened. But Bloomberg, I would be surprised if he doesn't lose another couple of points because of this debate. The first debate that he was in really hurt him bad. And there was a couple of moments. So what do you do if you know that you did horribly in the first debate, but you want to sort of make it seem like, these things happen. It's not a big deal, right? It's not a big deal. We've all been in this situation where something embarrassing happens. And you're embarrassed about something, and you have two ways of responding. You can respond defensively and signal to people that you're defensive about it, and maybe there is some truth there or something. Maybe that's a problem. Or you can respond confidently and slough it off and maybe make even a joke at your own expense, which signals to people like, he's not bothered by this. Well, Bloomberg really tried to do the latter, but he ended up doing the former. And this is important here. Matt is going to scroll through to where it is in the debate. Now, this is an hour into the debate, and Michael Bloomberg is asked a question about redlining. But he wants you to know that he was in no way embarrassed by last week's debate performance.
In this
Mayor Bloomberg, please, we were going to ask you about this. I want to give you a chance to respond, because in addition to what Senator Warren just said on Twitter, she called you a liar and a borderline racist because of what you said about redlining.
Yes, I'm sorry, but unfortunately she's misinformed on redlining. You can go back and look at the record. I fought against it before 2008, the crisis, during 2008, and after that. Redlining is not the problem with the mortgage market, but it was a problem for the communities where it was done, and we stopped that. Let me also say, because since I have the floor for a second, that I really am surprised that all of these, my fellow contestants up here, I guess would be the right word for it, given nobody pays attention to the clock. I'm surprised they show up, because I would have thought after I did such a good job in beating them last week that they'd be a little bit afraid to do that. But let me just say, when you're talking about affordable housing...
Folks, listen, all right? This is, we try and stick to politics here. I don't like to give personal advice about stuff, certainly not financial advice, but I do understand this dynamic. And if you want to communicate to people that you're not defensive about something, if you meant to say it at the beginning of seeing them again for the first time, and you forget, don't wait to bring it up out of nowhere, because then it makes it seem like, yes, in fact, you've spent 50% of this debate waiting for a moment to pretend like you were just casually remarking about last
I'd like
week.
to spontaneously say now, an hour into the mark of the debate that we are presently in, that now that you're discussing another horrific thing that I've said and done in my career, we've already done, I guess, 2 of those, but it's not true. I didn't say that black people shouldn't have houses, but I did so great last time.
Dude, just take the L.
I just popped that joke off.
You gotta let it go. You don't want to force a round peg into a square hole. If you find yourself, I mean, this is like,
He had an audience that
ask me a question about gun violence, please.
and then it goes like this.
I'm not a racist, incidentally.
No, and then it
I
goes-
just want to make that clear.
No, it goes like this. You ask for the question about gun violence, and I go, okay, we'll get to that. What about blaming the financial crisis not on Wall Street, but on poor people?
Boy, I gotta tell you, great weather we're having these days, isn't it? I'm really surprised. What did he mean by contestant? Because no one's following the clock.
Because in reality shows, they break the clock.
Yeah.
Just like black people break their mortgage agreements, which is why we had redlining. Oh, I should have said that. You were misinformed about what I just said.
For some reason.
Anyways, I'm doing a great debate.
Every candidate besides Bernie last night thought it'd be a good idea, or at least Biden and Bloomberg, to just complain about how everyone's over-talking everybody else.
Right. Whiny Biden is the best
That's what
Biden.
America
Right,
wants.
exactly.
Someone complaining to the rev.
Right.
Just make fun of. I mean,
Excuse me, Mr. Trump has spoken of against me. Do I get extra points?
They want to speak to the manager.
There you
No, if Bloomberg doesn't drop at least 10 points after this debate, we will definitively know that the debates don't matter.
Well, the debates don't matter that much.
I mean, the last one seriously damaged him.
10 points?
I mean, I would.
I saw
be,
one that was up to 20.
I mean,
yeah, that one was bad.
I don't know if it was 10 actual points, but his trajectory went from like straight, almost straight up to basically like almost straight down.
I guess especially for someone like him who is just living in his own ad.
He was so susceptible to that because there was no foundation for his rise.
Well, as Tony Karen said, you know what Bloomberg's best moment was last night, right? The ad for his campaign.
That's right. Exactly. That's also, first off, let me just say this about the debate. I mean, the debate was bad. The questioners were really bad. And there was a time where the League of Women Voters sponsored all the debates, and they would have more or less the same the same moderators, a small group of them. And some of them were decent, some of them were problematic, but at least on some level they could create a narrative over the course of the debates. And because they weren't so commodified, there wasn't such a desire to sort of go after stuff that was sort of meaningless but might be more, of the moment. And this is, I don't expect a candidate to complain about those things because it comes off poorly. But really, this is such a disservice. The idea that these things are commodified in this fashion. The DNC, the RNC can do what they want, I guess. The DNC too can do what they want. But what they really should do is make a concerted effort to because they can't control the outcome of these things. It's already been clear, right? Like they tried to do it during the 2016 election, and it didn't work. It didn't cut in the favor that they thought it would. They don't have the ability to anticipate or predict the implications of these things. So just give it to an organization that is nonpartisan. Put in a list of moderators that you want. The Republicans can put in a list of moderators they want, and you randomly pick from them or something like that. There's a way to do this where it is not commodified. You can let the different networks, have the broadcast rights, but should not be a commercial for their own, cross promotion of their shows. It is just get people in there who can do the job well. as opposed to like trying to, pump your evening news thing.
Yeah,
That
put
sounds
it on
like
public
communism.
television.
That sounds like communism.
In fact, I think when the League of Women Voters did, I mean, I remember it was like McNeil and Lear who would do a lot of that.
It was
stuff.
always on PBS, right?
I can't quite remember, but nevertheless, like you can put it on if let all the networks decide if they want to carry it or not. And if they want to bid for the rights, let them bid for the rights. But you don't get control over the backdrop. You don't get control over the moderators.
Who streams
You don't
it?
get control over that. Yeah, it should be for public.
Yeah.
I mean, this theoretically is a public service. We got shut down on Twitch last night. I mean, I don't really care that much about it, but we anticipated that we probably might. But it's ridiculous.
It's totally fair use what we're doing.
I agree with
Particularly because it's not just criticizing the politicians, it's also criticizing the way this stuff is covered. That's important for democracy as well.
Yeah, and it's important that they don't have a say over people doing that.
We'll figure out another way of doing it. I guess Hassan, he does some type of sync thing. I got to figure that out. But hey, folks, sustainable sneakers. I've noticed this across the board now. There's more and more clothing and shoes that are sustainable. They're trying to, but nothing is as sustainable as Cariuma. These sustainable sneakers are the footwear of the future, and there is a big waiting list for Cariuma's low-impact kicks. Apparently 5,000 people deep. Cariuma is a DTC sustainable sneaker brand. Their high and low top styles are good-looking, crazy comfy, and consciously made. I don't even have mine here because I forgot to bring them in. I've been wearing them. But Cariuma shoes are the brand new, but they come with a perfect broke-in fit with old-school design and new-school ethics. Their Oka and Katiba sneakers are made with premium natural materials that are sourced responsibly. Plus, Cariuma just launched their 100% vegan and carbon-neutral sneaker, Ibi, made with 3D bamboo knit and recycled PET green EVA outsoles made from sugar cane, a cork and organic Momona oil insole, and recycled laces, threads, and labels. All of their styles come with their signature Crazy Comfort green insoles. Their packaging is made from recycled and 100 recyclable materials. And by purchasing carbon offsets, they literally create a footprint balance, a carbon shipping footprint balance of 0. If your pair doesn't fit perfectly, you return them free of charge. Literally, I was wearing these 2 nights ago. I walked by Mila's room. My daughter, she's 14. She has had a lot to say, critical of my sartorial. And her response when she saw the sneakers was literally like, "Whoa, Dad." That is a quote. For a limited time, our listeners can get exclusive 15% off your first pair of Cariuma sneakers. Go to Cariuma, CARIUMA.com/majority to get 15% off. Check it out. That's Cariuma, CARIUMA.com/majority for 15% off today. Folks, it's a very, if you are anything like me, you have no time to read but for stuff for work or to your kids at night, like Harry Potter or, yes, I'm doing it. But there's an incredible app called Blinkist that will be your new secret weapon for reading books that you there are some takeaways there that you want. You don't necessarily have time to read through all of the prose. Because Blinkist takes the best key takeaways, the total baseline need-to-know information from thousands of nonfiction books, condenses them down to just 15 minutes that you can read or listen to on your phone, on your tablet, or your web browser. It's made for busy people. You can listen to it. You can read it. So for me, there's like a whole, I have like almost like, they have a bunch of different categories, but I have a whole sort of like silos of stuff that I feel like, I should read this, but I'm not going to. Or I'd like to read that, but I don't have the time to do it. And so for me, there's a lot of like, I'll read about like pick up some quick history books, just some of the key takeaways.
Normandy.
Some of the stuff like the business stuff. Like I don't know anything about business. And there's some concepts that I've picked up through this stuff that has been helpful, just like even, like the 80-20 rule. I didn't know anything about that. You don't want to put, 80% of your resources into something that's, only going to give you 20% returns. You want to do the reverse. And mostly 80% of the returns comes from 20% of your efforts. But now I'm on to this whole thing where it's like, and I wish I knew this, well, they probably didn't have it 14 years ago, but they have all these titles in parenting. And you can read 6 of these things in an hour, essentially, or listen to them. And because, I went through, 20 parenting books, and you get to the end of it, and you're like, this was a waste. That's what you go through. What? Having the kids, period. No, I may still do it. Like, I will not sit down and read an entire parenting book, but I'll listen to 3 different parenting books if it takes me a half an hour, takes me 35 minutes, you bet. You could use any tips you can get. With Blinkist, you get unlimited access to read or listen to their entire massive library of condensed nonfiction books, all for one low price. And for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/Majority Report. You try it for free for 7 days, and then you save 25% off your new subscription. That's Blinkist, BLINKIST.com/Majority Report to start your free 7-day trial and save 25%. They got that book by Jared Diamond, Turning Points for Nations in Crisis. That seems particularly relevant right now.
Be a really interesting book.
Future of Capitalism by Paul Collier. I don't think it's a Marxist critique, but
Collier's he's a development economist. That would be interesting.
Yep. And maybe not necessarily something you want to read the whole thing, or maybe you listen to that for 10, 12 minutes and you say, I'm going to read the whole book.
That's what I was going to say. Blinkist is actually also a great way to preview whether or not you really have to like, this is a great intro and I'm going to read the rest.
Sign up now at Blinkist.com/Majority Report. Blinkist.com/Majority Report. All right, let's get back into the debate here and go over some of the things that we are. We could talk about also. Let's do the. Let's do the debate, and then we're going to get into it. The big story, I think, is coronavirus. And that, I think, we said this in the wrap-up last night, but I still believe that there was a big opportunity for the Democratic presidential candidates last night to leverage coronavirus. And I think, it actually could have been effective for all of them. Because, one, for, I think, 60% of the electorate, at least, the idea, and people are predicting this now, that we're going to have travel restrictions in this country. I don't think they're going to be like, you can't go out of your house, but I think it's quite possible that it may impact the domestic flights at certain times. Who knows? And I don't think we're going to have a huge rash of deaths, but I think they want to keep it under control because it's not as bad as the flu, but it's in terms of its ability to kill people at this point. But we also have an entire system that tries to mitigate what happens with the flu, right? We have flu vaccinations. We have hospitals that are prepared to deal with kids coming in with the flu.
And it still kills a ton of people every year.
And it kills a ton of people. And so, and regardless of whether it turns into anything or not, the concern and anxiety is real. My kids have been coming home from school for weeks concerned about the coronavirus, which means that there are other parents out there who are concerned about the coronavirus because the kids are not reading, as far as I know, the international section of the newspaper. And this would have been an opportunity for any of these candidates to go up there and show, I'm completely competent, talk about a kitchen table issue. This is one. It also would bring about the fact that one of the things that really Donald Trump has escaped in his presidency because many of the incompetencies that are throughout the administration are things that are obscured to people who aren't in government, and things that, we will feel the impact of the incompetence for years to come, years and years to come. But we won't necessarily be able to draw a direct line to it. But there are times where there are crises, where there are events. Wes in Japan on Twitter, our friend who called in during Fukushima reminded me there are no natural disasters. There are only things that happen in nature that man is not prepared to deal with. I think that was the point he was saying. And this is an instance where Donald Trump has not had to face a crisis of this sort. And it is one that is like coming down the pike slowly. And there is political value to this. There is actually also material value, because you put political pressure onto the White House and they're going to have to respond and actually start to do stuff, because this is going to be a problem for us. And so I think they missed an opportunity, and we'll talk about it. Chuck Schumer apparently yesterday was already in the Senate and had, was outlining a list that they wanted everybody in the Senate to start to push to get the administration to ramp back up, because they've done a lot of cuts. We'll talk about the specifics of that.
Yeah, but you don't want people to vote out of fear, do you?
Out of fear? Yeah, exactly. I think the idea that, like, this is, we have not had an opportunity. People go out there and they say Donald Trump is incompetent. But as a citizen of the country, some people, I think, experience Donald Trump's malignancy insofar as, like if you're a person of color and, Jeff Sessions says to the police departments around the country, like, hey, don't worry about it, guys. We're not gonna come a knocking. Or, if you're an immigrant, or if, there's a whole host of folks who are directly implicated by his malignancy. But in terms of incompetency, we've only been told about his incompetency, right? There's only acting cabinet members. We don't see any, It's all theoretical. This is where the rubber meets the road. And this is why it will have salience. And this is why they're so freaked out about it in the White House and pretending that it's not happening.
Well, we saw it in Puerto Rico, but a lot of people apparently don't care what
Don't
happens
care.
in Puerto Rico.
Don't care. Exactly. And that's why their response to what was happening in Texas was, they put more emphasis in it. I think what we saw in Puerto Rico was one part incompetence and one part malignancy. Like, I think that there was just like, we're going to punish Puerto Rico.
I would say more than, malignancy. And I think it's been a big problem, and I don't want this virus to spread, obviously, but I think that there's been I think part of the reason that Trump is doing well in terms of his polling numbers is that for a fair amount of people, they're starting to conform to the idea that he's actually just, he's just a normal president. And that doesn't match with the huge amount of melodrama around him. So something like this could undercut that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, all right, let's do this. We don't need to do the debate in order, right? We can do some of the corona. Let's go to the debate, and then we'll come back to the coronavirus stuff. In the debate, like I say, Michael Bloomberg was the biggest loser. At one point, he is asked about China. Now, Michael Bloomberg has an enormous investment in China. Enormous investment. In ways that, like, I don't think we can even imagine. And the coronavirus is bringing up an issue, and we'll talk about it in a bit, of, we're going to have, right now, there's a list that the CDC has, I think it is, of 150 antibiotics, prescription medications, et cetera, that they are concerned we will not be able to have access to because the coronavirus will have shut down production. And this is a big concern of a lot of people, that not only that Matt Stoller is very good on this, that we have outsourced so much of our production to China that we are very, very reliant on them doing things that are in our interests when sometimes they may not be able to do that. And so here is Mike Bloomberg being asked a question.
Mayor Bloomberg, you've said that President Xi Jinping of China is not a dictator and that he is responsive to his constituents and that the U.S. must cooperate with Beijing. How far does that go? Would you allow Chinese firms to build critical U.S. infrastructure?
No, I would not. And I think the Chinese government has not been open. Their press, the freedom of press does not exist there. Their human rights record is abominable, and we should make a fuss, which we've been doing, I suppose.
Make a fuss,
but
I
we
suppose.
Make no mistake about it. We have to deal with China if we're ever going to solve the climate crisis. We have to deal with them because our economies are inextricably linked. We would not be able to sell or buy the products that we need. And in terms of whether he's a dictator, he does serve at the behest of the Politburo, of their group of people. But there's no question he has an enormous amount of power. But he does play to his constituency. You can negotiate with him. That's exactly what we have to do.
Now, there's a story in The Intercept right now by a woman named Letta Hong Fincher. We've had on the show. And she talks about, the story is about what the Bloomberg limited partners threatened her.
Basically, it wasn't even her. Her husband was a reporter for Bloomberg. He reported this series on how the Xi Jinping's family had enriched themselves, essentially. They got credible death threats. And this was in a period of time where real death threats. A British businessman had just been poisoned by the wife of a senior politician. Read the article. That's the context. So she tweeted out in October 2012, now that the New York Times has gone public about the Chinese government pressure, I can admit that we've gotten death threats after the Bloomberg story on Xi Jinping. Within hours of my tweet, the original My Plot replies to questions. A Bloomberg manager called my husband and said, get your wife to delete her tweets immediately. And anyways, it goes from there. We can't summarize all of it. But the point is that Bloomberg did not have the back of their journalist and this family getting threats for doing this reporting. Quite the opposite.
Well, but it's not just a question of them not be there. They have their holdings are so huge in China. They are so afraid of offending the Chinese government that their lawyers were attacking this family.
And the Bloomberg ended up killing this story and basically said, if we run it, we'll be kicked out of the country. So.
Folks can check that out, The Intercept. So you've got Michael Bloomberg here. Now, this concept, he said this before, that they have a constituency. The idea that there is any leader of any country, like if you're a king, guess what? You have a constituency. You have to deal with the dukes, or you got to deal with the king of the north, or whatever it is. Like it doesn't.
I like this because it does show in general that it is actually kind of dumb to speak about singular heads of state in general. That is almost never the case. Like even in North Korea, you're always talking about more complex systems. So if he was just making a public service point of like, wait a second, guys, that's actually not how China works, and we need to be smart about it, that would be valid. But they're not
autocratic.
Yeah.
They have a Politburo that manages their
it's the
state
point
capitalism.
where democracy is optional.
Well, which I think is quite optional.
He is conflating a democracy with having a constituency, right? And every single leader has a constituency. It may be just the billionaires. It may be just the people who have all the military, or it could actually be like the people who voted for them.
Yeah, that
if it's a
to be
democracy.
What he was trying to imply.
He said this before. This is not the first time he said this. And
they do public opinion polling. He's equating that as well. And that's very Bloombergian. And when you look at the Chinese model, well, look, I mean, this is actually what the Chinese will put forward. They say, no, we're incredibly responsive. If you come out and you say there's a problem with garbage pickup here or something like this, we got you.
Right. As long as it's not you're actually looking for any type of power. We're just trying to provide you with services so that you do not kick us out of power if you get to the point where you could. So Bloomberg goes on, gets away with that because of how credulous the CBS moderators are. But what you will not get away with is saying exactly what Barack Obama said, that there are some countries who are autocratic who have achieved some success in certain areas of serving their public. Like, for instance, you could say that they're good with the garbage pickup. But the CBS will not let Bernie Sanders get away with anything like that, even though they've just let Michael Bloomberg get away with the idea that China, because Xi Jinping has a constituency, he's not a dictator.
Topic, Senator Sanders.
Can I say one word on
this? It's in the same theme, sir. You've praised the Chinese Communist Party for lifting more people out of extreme poverty than any other country. You also have a track record of expressing sympathy for socialist governments in Cuba and in Nicaragua. Can Americans trust that a democratic socialist president will not give authoritarians a free pass?
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world, and I was really amazed at what Mayor Bloomberg just said a moment ago. He said that the Chinese government is responsive to the Politburo. But who the hell is the Politburo responsive to? Who elects the Politburo? You got a real dictatorship there? Of course you have a dictatorship in Cuba. What I said is what Barack Obama said in terms of Cuba, that Cuba made progress on education. Yes, I think. Really? Really?
Yes, because there's no comparing those two
What Barack Obama said is they made great progress on education and health care. That was Barack Obama.
I talked to Barack Obama.
Excuse me. Occasionally, it might be a good idea to be honest about American foreign policy. And that includes the fact that America has overthrown governments all over the world, in Chile, in Guatemala, in Iran. And when dictatorships, whether it is the Chinese or the Cubans, do something good, you acknowledge that. But you don't have trade love letters with them.
That clip also not only did it point out that you are asking me a question about being sympathetic to autocratic leaders, and you just let that dude get away with talking about the largest dictatorship in the world as if it was a responsive democracy because there's a Politburo. It also featured Pete Buttigieg's like sort of verbal tick that he had the whole evening, where he was talking almost like as if Pete Buttigieg was in a separate debate, in a separate temporal plane that would sometimes, like, the streams would cross and you would hear him talking. No one was paying attention, and he thought that he was being statesmanlike, and he couldn't really get there.
It was like a TV show where the first time through the run of events, a character is like speaking very forcefully, and then you look back on it and actually he wasn't saying anything at all. He was just imagining he was saying
exactly. Right. It's one of those things like, this is what I would have said in that moment. And so that was, you got the whole sort of gist. And of course, there's Sanders again doing something that I think by now it's not as sort of shocking. I remember in 2016 when he did that in a debate with Hillary Clinton, where he actually like said the words like, we intervened in countries and was wrong. Like, that was shocking then. And now it's a sort of nobody.
Did we even poll when he called Netanyahu a reactionary racist? I mean, that's historical.
What's also messed up about that moment, though, was they only asked the Jews about Israel and then just threw in Warren for like to make it seem like Israel's a pretty significant issue for all the candidates.
Can I just go on my ballywick for 30 seconds, regardless of Bernie's got to calibrate a lot of things, and I think they're actually overall doing a decent job, but these aren't just historical. They're trying to dislodge governments in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba right now, and really your opinions on them are irrelevant to U.S. interference, which is extraordinarily aggressive, particularly under Trump and Pompeo. And so it's not just, I mean, the history lesson's usually important, but it's like when people like Buttigieg are posturing and saying, first of all, we don't want to talk about the Cold War. We'll get to that. It's offensive. But they're talking about regime change and coup mongering right this second.
Yeah, I mean, they brought a guy in from Venezuela to the State of the Union address, and everybody in the room, Democrats and Republicans alike, addressed the guy as president. And basically, they're the only people who do. Nobody in Venezuela refers to that dude as the president.
And in Nicaragua, those demonstrations, which are done in 2018, absolutely had a significant U.S. role. Does that mean that Ortega, it's always the same dynamic. And the one thing I will add that is actually pretty interesting, that like, if we're going to go, and there's legitimate criticism of both, but like I would err on the side of cutting a break for an 11 million person island nation state that resisted U.S. economic warfare, assassinations, economic terrorism, an invasion to today, and gave people healthcare, literacy, and also helped like end apartheid and liberate Angola. I would actually err a little bit more softly for them. More so than like, the largest states, capitalist country, or, neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics.
Oh, yeah. The moderators are absolutely unfair in equating Cuba to China. There's no question about it. Also, like, okay, I know maybe we don't need a history lesson as part of the debate, but if he wanted to, Bernie could bring up some of the terrible atrocities committed by, say, the Somoza dictatorship.
Yeah.
Like the worst things that you can think of. Raping nuns and children, things of that nature.
So moving on, so we have Bloomberg first exposing that he's an onomatron and cannot deliver a joke and doesn't understand the point of the joke. Then we had Bloomberg showing, it's almost as if he's showing every aspect of what is problematic about his candidacy, and he's doing it one step at a time. And so we showed his wealth and his investment in China, how conflicted he is in terms of assessing what China is, and therefore would be equally conflicted in terms of curbing things like, hey, you've put 1 million to 3 million people in concentration camps because they're Muslims, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're going to see what is problematic about Mike Bloomberg as an oligarch in this country. No longer conflicted, with international things, which is very similar to Donald Trump. Here he is going to expose why he's conflicted in this country, where he accidentally reminds people he has bought literally all his support in Congress.
Let's just go on the record. They talked about 40 Democrats, 21
of
those.
Pause it. I should say this is in response to the fact that Elizabeth Warren pointed out that Michael Bloomberg funded multiple Republican senators through the Senate to the Republicans through all the money he gave to people like Pat Toomey. He gave money, I don't think she brought this up, to Snyder in Michigan, Lindsey Graham, et cetera, et cetera.
Snyder, after, I believe, well, no, actually, I guess it would be before Flint. But
it was before Flint, but it was after he had already propagated the city manager rule. But he basically, that money helped Snyder go on to poison hundreds, if not thousands, of people.
Let's just go on the record. They talked about 40 Democrats. 21 of those were people that I spent $100 million to help elect. All of the new Democrats that came in, put Nancy Pelosi in charge, and gave the Congress the ability to control this president, I got them. Number two, when you talk about
I bought
money,
them. What? Let's hear that again. I got them.
Really saying the quiet parts out loud.
Exactly. So don't remind everybody I bought the politicians. Oh, darn it.
Gave the Congress the ability to control this president. I got them. Number two.
God, this is like some Simpsons level stuff here.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know what they're doing right now?
The only moment of self-awareness in the debate.
I'll tell you what they're doing right now at Bloomberg headquarters. They are writing a joke about like him buying, and he's going to wait until like 3 or 4 weeks from now and spring it on everybody. Remember that time? I'm going to remind you again about how badly I did in the debate. So there it is. That was Michael Bloomberg's, one of the problems with Michael Bloomberg being an oligarch. Now, next up, Michael Bloomberg, I mean, honestly, it's amazing how multidimensionally problematic Michael Bloomberg is.
He's a target-rich environment.
Right. Let's just go through this one more time here. Okay, can't tell a joke and is horribly defensive. That's fine. He can't really campaign. He defends a dictator in China because he's got so much holdings there that he doesn't want to get on the wrong side of them. He accidentally claims that he bought Congress because he's literally paid for so many of his endorsements and whatnot in trying to defend the fact that he also bought the Senate for the Republicans. And now let's move into his treatment of women who worked for him and his use of NDA and his money again to escape any accountability.
Years old, I got my first job as a special education teacher. I loved that job. And by the end of the first year, I was visibly pregnant. The principal wished me luck and gave my job to someone else. Pregnancy discrimination, you bet. But I was 21 years old, I didn't have a union to protect me, and I didn't have any federal law on my side. So I packed up my stuff and I went home. At least I didn't have a boss who said to me, kill it, the way that Mayor Bloomberg
never
alleged
said that.
to have said to one of his pregnant employees. People want a chance to hear. People want a chance to hear from the women who
I never said that.
I want to allow the mayor
for the
an
record, if
opportunity
she
to
was a
respond.
teacher in New York City, she would never have had that problem. We treated our teachers the right way, and the unions will tell you exactly that.
Pause it for 1 second. Just on that one point, go into my tweets, please, because I retweeted a writer from that right-wing rag, that left-wing rag, the New York Times, who has been writing on schools, who New York Times reporters do not generally take these positions. Here, there it is, right there, Eliza Shapiro. And she tweeted out, so Bloomberg was in an all-out war with the teachers union in New York City for years. If you call them, as Bloomberg suggested, you will get quite an earful. So Bloomberg's lying about that, but which is, I guess, a prima facie argument that he's a liar. But continue.
Well, Mayor
Bloomberg, Senator Warren has raised.
Let us have the women have an opportunity to speak. The Bloomberg corporations and Mayor Bloomberg himself have been accused of discrimination. They are bound by non-disclosures so that they cannot speak. If he says there is nothing to hide here, then sign a blanket release and let those women speak out so that they can tell their stories the way I can tell my story without having
Thank you. I am Nora.
going to be sued by a billionaire.
Thank you. We have a number of issues discussed tonight, but I want to give the mayor an opportunity to respond because she has raised concerns about women in your workplace. At the last debate, you said some of your female employees might not have liked some of your jokes. Did these women take your jokes wrong, or were you wrong to make the jokes?
Probably wrong to make the jokes. I don't remember what they were, so I assume if it bothered them, I was wrong, and I apologize. I'm sorry for that. But what happened here is we went back 40 years, and we could only find 3 cases where women said they were uncomfortable.
We
Nobody
only found
accused me of
3.
doing anything other than just making a comment or two. And what the senator did suggest was that we release these women from the non-disclosure agreement. I did that 2 days later, and my company has said we will not use non-disclosure agreements ever again. The senator has got it. And I don't know what else she wants us to do.
Oh, I'll be
We're
clear.
following exactly what she asked to
I'll tell
do.
you exactly
and the
what I want
trouble
you to
is, with this senator, enough is never enough for what this.
Oh.
I'm going to start focusing on some of
Jesus.
these other things. We just cannot continue.
He just
to
falls right
relitigate
into
this
it. He
every
can't even
time.
get through
We
his
did what
whole
she asked.
Bitches
And,
be crazy.
Thank you. We've probably made the world
Honestly.
better because of it. And by my company renouncing using these, we probably
Nag,
changed,
nag, nag.
hopefully, the corporate landscape all across
Exactly.
America.
If you get nominated, we'll be relitigating this all year.
There's wait, pause it for 1 second. We just like this clip also has everything in it. There's Michael Bloomberg trying to defend himself and can't help but like basically say, we're gonna listen to this. It sounds like my ex-wife over here, right? You know, give me a break.
You don't remember the old Borscht Belt joke? It ends with the punchline is "Kill it, kill your baby."
This this is just another part of the complaint of one of the complaints that was in. I don't know how they got a hold of this, but this somehow was released. When Bloomberg noticed Garrison standing nearby, he asked, "Why didn't they ask you to be in the picture?" "I guess they saw your face," he said to one of his employees.
Sick burn.
Yeah.
Got her.
The graph above
Here
that.
and here it is. Okay. And so continuing his penchant for ridiculing recently married women in his employ, Bloomberg asked the plaintiff, "How's your married life? You married?" Plaintiff responded that her marriage was great and was going to be better in a few months, that she was pregnant and the baby was due the following September. He responded to her, "Kill it."
Kill it.
And plaintiff asked Bloomberg to repeat himself, and again he said, "Kill it," and muttered, "Great, number 16," suggesting to his plaintiff his unhappiness that 16 women in the company had maternity-related status.
And just the source of that, the Washington Post interviewed a former Bloomberg employee, David Zellinger, who said he witnessed the conversation with the saleswoman. Zellinger said who has not previously spoken about the matter, said Bloomberg's behavior toward the woman was outrageous. I understood why she took offense. In case you need, verification, because he's just lying about that.
He's totally lying. But let's go back. So he's dropped the ball there, and then Pete Buttigieg has a comment that is actually like decent, like, we're going to be litigating this throughout the entire next, general campaign. Maybe true or not, but again, he manages to sort of sound like somebody's just like dropped in a random Pete Buttigieg sound machine.
Someone watching at home.
Exactly.
We thought that when he spoke last night in the beginning that Matt was doing drops.
If you get nominated, we'll be relitigating this all year.
Do what I asked.
Senator Warren, that is a very serious charge that you leveled at the mayor.
Yes.
You told a woman to get an abortion. What evidence do you have of that?
Her own words.
And Mayor Bloomberg, could you respond to this?
I never said it. Period. End of story. Categorically, never said it. When I was accused of doing it, we couldn't figure out what she was talking about. But right now, I'm
crazy.
sorry if she heard what she thought she heard.
She's
or whatever
hysterical.
happened. I didn't take any pleasure in that, and we've just
What
got to
I
go on. But I
asked
never
the
said
mayor
it. Come on.
to do is to do a release of all people who have
We are
discrimination
doing that, Senator.
claims. Look, who have
We want to get to the issue.
Come on,
there you go.
sweetie.
So
That's going to play great against Trump when they talk about abortion.
right, and I would never say that. I would never
But
say that.
there's some people that are still literalist idiots that think that Trump won't do that. He'll have a field day with all this stuff with Bloomberg.
We got one more Bloomberg clip, and then we'll get to that. We'll get to that one. One more Bloomberg clip to just round out his multi-dimensional problems that he has as a candidate. We have gone through his conflict of interest with China and his inability to respond truthfully about China because of all his holdings there. That's where his billionaire status becomes a conflict. We've seen that obviously with Donald Trump. We went through his being an oligarch, where he basically admits and then quickly changes his the words he's using, that he's bought a bunch of Congress people. We've gone through the point where he has shown an incredible disdain for women, even in the context of claiming that he didn't show any disdain for women. He shows disdain for a woman bringing it up again.
There's no pleasing these people.
There's no pleasing the ladies.
I thought, do you guys have the same hormones going on?
Give me. And then, of course, we showed his inability to actually be a campaigner and, even deliver some self-effacing joke. Well, here is Mike Bloomberg. And they've actually cut this clip as a way of showing that he has sensitivity to the experience of African Americans in this country.
Woke Bloomberg.
Yeah, he's totally woke.
Woke is
but
not
the one
good.
thing that Michael Bloomberg cannot possibly imagine is that his billions of dollars weren't a function of him, right? That his position and station in life, that there were no, the doors that were not shut on him because of just how he was positioned, they don't exist. And it takes all the effort he can muster to concede that maybe things are a little bit more difficult or would have been difficult had he been black.
Oh, wait a second. I know that if I were black, my success would have been a lot harder to achieve. And I know a lot of black people that if they were white, it would have been a lot easier for them. That's just a fact, and we've got to do something about it than rather just demagogue about it.
I love how he says, like, he gets the big concession he has is that I understand my success would have been harder to achieve.
I would have been the owner of BET if I was black.
I mean, the idea, just statistically speaking, the chances of becoming a billionaire if Michael Bloomberg was particularly his age.
Could someone do a version of Black Like Me starring Mayor Bloomberg? I think that would be excellent.
And making his money on Wall Street services, I think, is highly dubious.
He also lied about what his positions were on Redlining earlier, and he continued his lie about what his position on Stop and Frisk is.
Which he will continue to do. And this, again, I will plug Adolph Reed, though. This is a big part of his critique of all of these discursive methodologies, because they basically are like, look, if you can be trained to check your privilege or whatever else, all this other rhetorical maneuvering, you can use that to barrel forward with the same policy set. And that's exactly what he's doing while he lies about that.
We saw it from a lot of
that's what they're all
last
doing
night,
because
but
it's
he's
just a
certainly
discursive,
the most egregious.
Of course, because it's just
example.
a discursive, it's just a discursive method.
Do we want to go into the Stop and Frisk line now?
Have we played this yet?
Sure, let's do that as long as we're doing our Bloomberg swing. Here is Michael Bloomberg. He's talking about Stop and Frisk, claiming that this is done in so much in the passive voice, right? Which is like, it was there and then it metastasized.
It got out
its
of
own.
hand.
It got out of hand, like like the invisible hand of the police force was driving this. And then when I saw it was getting out of control, I tried to control it as much as I could. It was like riding a tiger.
I want to ask you about a question that impacts the black and brown community. You've apologized for Stop and Frisk repeatedly. What exactly are you apologizing for?
We let it get out of control, and when I realized that, I cut it back by 95%, and I've apologized and asked for forgiveness. I've met with black leaders to try to get an understanding of how I can better position myself and what I should have done and what I should do next time. But let me tell you, I have been working very hard. We've improved the school system for black and brown
I got a subscription to Safety Pin Box.
And Ari Melber had on the woman who ruled on that.
This is the judge who heard the case that stopped Stop and Frisk. And let's hear her perspective. She's now retired.
And this was before the debate, by the way. She was responding to the previous time he lied about
Retired federal judge. Did Mike Bloomberg decide unilaterally, it sounds like, oh, this has gotten out of hand, we better pull this back?
I'll say this whether you do or not as a former judge. Mayor Giuliani had a tough policy that was controversial on predominantly black neighborhoods in New York.
That's right.
And Mayor Bloomberg came in and said, let's make it even harsher, to the point that it was ruled by you unconstitutional.
That's true. And there was a second half to your question. You said, what did people say last night that was wrong? Well, Mayor Bloomberg said, when I realized it was bad toward the end, I ended it and dropped 95%. That is not accurate. In the last 2 years or so, it began to drop dramatically. It dropped 67%, not 95%. But it wasn't because he realized, had an epiphany that it was wrong. It's because of the court rulings. That's what happened.
Right.
I ruled.
And Joe Biden said that the Obama administration stopped it. I thought you stopped it.
Yes,
Was Joe Biden correct or not?
Of course he's not. You got in just ahead of me. I was going to say that Vice President Biden was totally
Lucky I'm
wrong,
not in your
too.
courtroom.
That's right. He said that the Obama administration appointed a federal monitor. Totally wrong. I appointed a federal monitor in August of 2013 who didn't take office for 10 months because Mayor Bloomberg insisted on trying to appeal my ruling and getting it overturned.
So simply put, Joe Biden, in your view, took credit for something that judges actually did.
Absolutely.
That's what you call what is it when you get the strike, and even though that's the spare rather, and you got one pin over here and one pin over here, and the ball rolls and bounces off of both.
I was the guy banging the gavel.
That's right. I was the guy who stopped it all. Bloomberg, horrible liar. Biden, horrible liar. And we didn't even have time to get into Biden talking about him getting arrested in South Africa or something.
I was the guy who said, "Hey, you got to talk to Mbeki." I was there, but I want to really keep emphasizing though the Joe Biden's lies are terrible and they're egregious, and they're like Hillary Clinton's lies. There is something qualitatively different we get to in the realm of Bloomberg, where he is the personal conduit of authoritarianism. I mean, stop and frisk is literally an apartheid-style policy. It's not hyperbole. And, it's not like a legislative
Biden's got that thing of where he sort of puts himself in positions that maybe somebody else told him the story. And he's like, yeah, that was me type of thing.
Versus
Bloomberg is lying.
I am lying about in a completely verifiable manner, banking on the fact that my money and propaganda will overwhelm people telling the truth.
Yeah, he's doing Trump shit.
Yep. So there it is. I mean, those are the what was
more
that? 6 different sort of elements of Bloomberg that any one of them I think would be enough to depress enough Democratic voters in a general election to cause his loss. And that's why, the fact is, after 2 debates, literally, I don't know how much time did Bloomberg speak in those 2 debates combined? Maybe 25 minutes. Let's just say 25 minutes of exposure Mike Bloomberg gets versus the hours, maybe days, probably weeks. And I mean this continuous loop of 30-second ads probably could amount to a full week or 2 or 3 or even a month. He spent over $350 million on ads. And 30 minutes of actually opening his mouth and addressing what's going on has sunk the value of that money. I think you shouldn't be able to run for office unless you go into a debate, but I don't know how you'd ever make them. How much? 26 minutes. Somebody's got to count up how much the ad time that he bought and sort of calculate. It's amazing. It's amazing what happens. And this is a very, very positive thing, not just for the Democratic Party, not just for America, but for democracy across the world on some level, because it shows that there is a limitation to what you can do with money. Now, he's a particularly egregious guy who, but there is... The irony is that his superpower, right, which has $65 billion, is his kryptonite, because that $65 billion has kept him in such a cocoon that he has absolutely no ability to understand why he is such a liability.
Yeah, call me naive, but I really thought someone with that much money would be able to afford the best coaches in the world and the best brand.
But you need to know that you have a problem. And the problem with that money is that everyone around you says you got no problems, boss.
you're going to save America.
That's 90% of it, and I think 10% of it is like, I think these debates are, when you watch an NBA game, you know that you can't do that. When you watch this, especially if you do what we do, we're like, come on, I can figure that out. And you don't realize that all of these people, this is a really intense process, right? And he's coming in with a typical arrogance, and it's like, especially when you're completely out of touch billionaire oligarch, but you also haven't campaigned for over a decade. Okay.
Yeah.
The last 10 years, all you've been doing is going to Davos and sitting with Fareed Zakaria and being like, how would you change public education, Mayor Bloomberg? Right. And all of a sudden, Elizabeth Warren's in your face and Bernie Sanders is in your face. And the moderators have to at least pretend to ask you about any number of abominable positions. You're totally not ready. And you can't be. I mean, he could hire the best coaches in the world. And, look, Trump does, first of all, he's an entertainer first and foremost, and he weirdly, he has higher emotional intelligence. I don't mean that as a value judgment. Well, it's also, but he knows how to work the room.
But
he knows how to.
He has political skills that Bloomberg lacks.
That's true, but also remember, the debates. The advantage that Trump had in the debates was he would say, I'm going to build a wall. And then Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio would come in with, I'm going to build a wall that's 2 feet higher.
Right.
There was nobody, there was nothing that he was saying that was really fundamentally different from, regardless of whether you think the Democratic Party upholds these principles, everything that we're talking about are theoretically principles of the Democratic Party.
I'm also talking instincts. I don't know how look, we know that you had to pay a huge amount of money to be in that audience. Okay. So even if Bloomberg had nothing else to do with it, apparently the tickets to get into that room, if I'm reading Lee Fong correctly, I mean, tell me whether or not that's right. I read that last night.
I've heard that has been the case in most of these things, but it does feel like
it feels like the room is pretty nice to Bloomberg.
Yep.
There was an amazing clip going around last night of Trump getting booed vigorously at a Republican debate, and Trump doing, frankly, what Bernie maybe should do at a certain point of being like, looks like the room's stacked against me, but sorry, folks, telling the truth. Right. That's the difference. Right. Bloomberg is paying for the room to be stacked in the large metaphorical sense. Trump had no problem going out there and working the broader electorate. And which is another reason that people coming out with this scam that Bloomberg could beat Trump are the most just either delusional or dishonest people in the entirety of politics right now.
Or
really well compensated.
Boom. Good employees.
I'm hearing so
good
many
employees.
Some of these anecdotes have to be real, but like I saw a tweet the other day. A woman said a canvasser came to her house. She said, "Sorry, we're a Bernie household." The canvasser said, "Oh yeah, me too. Absolutely. Have a good one."
How much do you think the team that came up with these hats made total on just coming up with the design for this? Not a socialist and bringing the buses.
Hey, I've got an idea. How about a little flag in the tag? On the
respect the hustle.
Let's see how well these take off, Mike.
Oh, do they all of them?
Oh yeah, they all have little flags.
Not a socialist. Bring in the boss. That is just because we all know how much Americans love their bosses.
Did you bother focus grouping this? They couldn't have.
Who in their right mind would broadcast their love of bootlicking to the world on a hat?
They said to Bloomberg, this is a message directly to Trump. You're his boss. And he's like, I love it. I love it. How much are the hats? $75 a hat. Wow, that seems normal. Okay.
So no more expensive than a gallon of milk.
Right, exactly.
Just a banana, Michael. How much could it cost?
Am I really getting? I can't believe how cheap this is.
You guys for a hat?
I knew I should have gone with you guys. You were right. You could get the best deals.
And Americans are out here complaining about costs, and you could get a basic ball cap for $75? What a bunch of whiners.
Unbelievable.
The only boss I want to bring in is Bruce Springsteen, who, by the way, needs to endorse Bernie.
Neil Young did.
All right, let's take a quick break. Head into the fun half. When we come back, we got a little bit more on the debate, but we're going to talk a lot about coronavirus because I think there is well, one, I think it's a relevant thing to talk about, but from a political standpoint, in terms of pointing out something that could be extremely significant in this election, extremely significant, and something that could be a big opportunity for Democrats, both to, show that they're competent to the American public and to actually get the Trump administration off their arse. Apparently, based upon, I think, the pushing that we've seen, and credit where credit is due, Chuck Schumer got on this. I think the pressure has now forced the Trump administration to respond at the very least. I just don't know that they have the capacity, the ability to do so, but we will check that out in a moment. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. When you become a member of the Majority Report, not only do you support the free show, you get the free show free of commercials. And then you get the extra content. We have our members can see our video last night. I don't know if it lives anywhere else right now. We got shut down on Twitch. We shut it down on YouTube. So if you want to see our blow-by-blow of the debate, hop on to or become a member. Or if you're a member now, check it out. It's on the app. You can play video right on the app. We're going to be doing more of that as time goes on. So check that out. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. AM Quickie, sign up for it, folks. Try it out. I guarantee you, if you listen to this show, AM Quickie, sign up at amquickie.com. You listen to it for 5 days in a row, you'll be hooked. Hooked for life. And it's totally free. Also, don't forget, check out the Nomiki Show. You can find it at patreon.com/the Nomiki Show. And Michael and Nomiki are going to be in California.
Super Tuesday.
6 days from now.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Nuts.
It's going to be fun. Get your tickets. Alona's going to be there. Justin Jackson, Nando Vila. It's a
huge show.
It's a mega lineup. It'll be fun. On the latest TMBS, talked to Benjamin Dixon about Singapore and Mike Bloomberg and the cable news tantrum. Richard Wolff explained the labor theory of value to us and a whole bunch more. Patreon.com/TMBS, and where you get, fast amount of extra content as a patron. April 3rd at the North Door in Austin, Texas, live show with Anna Kasparian and Abby Martin. And this Sunday, check out my Twitter timeline, podcasting with Brianna Joy Gray and Daniel Denver. And then we're canvassing in the Bay State, dude, for
Bernie I should
Sanders.
say, I'm going to be doing, I think, right now, a live stream from Worcester, Mass. with John Benjamin on Saturday night in front of a bunch of canvassers, Bernie canvassers in Worcester, in Wormtown, in some old mill building. And we'll be going over the, what do you call it? The South Carolina results. And then I guess they get some tunes there. So, and should also say, Brendan. Okay, go ahead.
That is
great. Go ahead, Jamie. Go ahead.
Time,
I walked around Worcester recently. I think it helped me understand you a little better.
You walked around Worcester?
Yeah.
Jesus, I'm
like,
sorry.
what if Sam was a town?
Yeah, there's some of that. Sure.
Anyway, this week on the Antifada, I'm going to put myself on camera. I had on Heather Fortune, formerly of the amazing post-punk band Wax Idols, currently a solo artist as well as a writer and kind of a dirtbag leftist shit poster on Twitter. We talked about our canvassing trip to New Hampshire, which involved seeing Bernie open for the Strokes and starting a riot. Also, we talked about how capitalism is ruining music, a little bit of girl stuff, feminism, all the missing women of New Hampshire, and Heather spills the tea on why she quit the band White Lung. That's for the real heads. Patreon.com/the Antifada.
Literary Hangover, we did Ebenezer Cook's The History of Colonel Nathaniel Bacon's Rebellion. It's a poem, but don't be put off by that. We basically just talk about Bacon's rebellion and, among other things, how George Washington's dad committed a war crime immediately upon arrival.
Brendan, what is this? Is this the one that Leo is EPing?
Yeah. So I worked on a pilot in 2018, spring 2018, and is now finally being brought to series on True TV. It's called It's Personal with Amy Hoggart, who was on the Sam B show. I was the research producer and the casting coordinator for the pilot when I was gone for like 6 weeks here in 2018, which Sam so graciously let me go on sabbatical for.
It wasn't gracious, but it was nice.
I was going to say, that was brutal, I think.
No, Brendan, don't follow your dreams.
If those are your dreams, I got another thing to tell you that we got to sit down and talk about.
As an incentive, I'll share my bananas with you for lunch.
I didn't work on the series, but I am going to take credit for helping get it to series. So, best of luck to them. It's a 10-episode season. We'll see if it gets picked up for a second season. It premieres tonight, so help those people out.
Have they been doing? Like, Leo's been here for.
It took longer than I think they said it would take, as these things tend to do. But you and I, this is more of an off-mic conversation,
right? My friend Leo Allen is the EP of this show.
Hey, Brendan.
No, he wasn't there when you were there.
Like I said, this is an off.
Brendan, these apples aren't going to eat themselves.
Brendan got fired.
If you don't leave for 6 weeks, I could share some of my brown bag lunch with you.
I already did mine.
Good job. All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt. Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them. Almost has what?
What?
Almost says what? Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black Africans. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Some of these needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy. Pussy.
We'll talk about it later. Also, we forgot to turn on that boxy thing there. I've got a whole system where I'm gonna come in and it's gonna press one button. Everything's gonna turn on by remote. Oh yeah, folks. I mean, of course, people won't appreciate that. They won't because they won't experiencing it. They'll just see it. They won't be able to experience it. So this happened on Monday, correct? We didn't get to it on Tuesday, but as you know, and it was interesting, this also coincided with a piece in Vanity Fair, I believe it was, that suggested that MSNBC was going to bring on more Bernie-friendly people because they were aware of the fact that they don't have any Bernie-friendly people on. And I would even go a little further than that. The majority of people, not necessarily the hosts in prime time, but the majority of hosts, to the extent that they have an opinion, it is one of hostility. Last night after the debate, I was watching some MSNBC, and Stephanie Ruhle made the claim that Bernie Sanders had as many, if not more, situations in terms of saying things to women than Michael Bloomberg did. Now, that's simply not true. I suspect what she's referring to is that piece of satire he wrote 40 years ago. NPR did a breakdown of this in 2016. It was satire. There was a lot of things that were written like that at that time.
Yeah, it was the language of radical feminism at the time, which is the ironic part.
Yes, and it was a piece that criticized traditional gender roles. Nevertheless, that is fundamentally different than telling people who are working for you, saying things to them, treating them in such a way that you need to pay them off not to talk about it. But she went unchallenged because they don't have the resources in terms of people there who are going to say, like, actually, I know what you're talking about and you're wrong. They theoretically could have invited me on. I am a paid contributor. I get paid only when I show up there. So and it's not that much, I can assure you, that it wouldn't in any way inhibit their desire to have me there. I think the car ride that they send probably is the pricey part of that. But nevertheless, the network is clearly conscious that they are ill-positioned for Bernie Sanders to deal with Bernie Sanders if he is the nominee. And Chris Matthews has been saying like a series of things that, are
crazy.
Some are offensive and some are just like Looney Tunes. The Mangio line that he used, I think it's in poor taste if you're sensitive to the fact that Bernie Sanders lost family members in the Holocaust, to use that analogy. But some people say, well, it's just a standard, military analogy. That I think you could accept that as well. But what that analogy belied, what it revealed was that Chris Matthews saw Bernie Sanders win in the same way that the French did when their country was overrun by hostile forces.
The metaphor still means what it means, despite it being tasteless.
Exactly.
It's hard to leave out context when you're talking about Nazis.
Right. Well, but I understand that. But I think there's, people can get sensitive about the Nazi. But I'm saying, even if you just perceive that as a military campaign type of situation, when you talk about my feeling was I was thinking of this, it's like saying I found out that Bernie won and all I could think of was like the Titanic. Wait, what? That was a horrible tragedy.
Exactly.
What's his job title? Isn't he supposed to be a journalist?
Well, no, look, you can have an opinion. It's just that it's a little bit problematic to see this as such a tragedy. it really, positions you, I think, poorly.
Yeah, he's taking the mask off.
Exactly. And people didn't like what they see. And so he came on the next night and said this.
Before getting into tonight's news, I want to say something quite important and personal. As I watched the one-sided results of Saturday's Democratic caucus in Nevada, I reached for an historical analogy and used a bad one. I was wrong to refer to an event from the last days, or actually the first days of World War II. Senator Sanders, I'm sorry for comparing anything from that tragic era in which so many suffered, especially the Jewish people, to an electoral result in which you were the well-deserved winner. This is going to be a hard-fought, heated campaign of ideas. In the days and weeks and months ahead, I will strive to do a better job myself of elevating the political discussion. Congratulations, by the way, to you, Senator Sanders, and to your supporters on a tremendous win down in Nevada.
Now, I got to say, as far as like apologies go, that was spot on. I mean, he
was a good apology.
He really clearly understood what was problematic about that. He was talking about something horribly tragic and comparing it to his feelings of someone's victory. And it's not like, I'm sorry. There is just no world in which, anybody who has been saying that, Donald Trump is the end of our democracy can look upon Bernie Sanders winning and perceive that as a existential tragedy.
It's a good view into the Chris Matthews mindset.
Yeah. And I think look, the bottom line is he's a professional, and it's one thing for him to feel that. That's all fine. People have different opinions about different people, but when it becomes so expressed and so obvious, then you're just not being a professional. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, liberals on MSNBC aren't supposed to conduct themselves like Chapo Trap House.
I just think,
that's right.
I just think that, Chris is in a comedy league of his own. But I like that. I think the apology is fine. And I think the goal is not to, try to corner him or force him to quit. The goal is to, the bigger point is that the voices are not there to push back, and there isn't several other people on the panel being like, dude, you're like Cold War paranoia or whatever story you've told yourself about Castro in the 60s has nothing to do with the immense economic squeeze on young people that they're finding appealing in the Sanders candidacy, as an example.
Right.
It's about the actual participation, not the optics, which I think actually transitions well into some ways into the next segment, because the problems persist.
So the night after Chris Matthews apologizes in what I think we've characterized as a very good apology. Who knows what the sincerity level is. I get the sense that it was probably sincere. I think he realized at the very least that he was unprofessional about that. Often what happens with people, I know with myself, I remember when I quit law school, I was like, I'm going to quit smoking, right? Because you want to balance it out. And I didn't, not for a long time. But in other words, sometimes when you're dealing with sort of emotional things, there's a certain whack-a-mole that happens. So you press down and you subjugate that sense of oi, I should not be so overreactive to Bernie Sanders' win.
Red Dawn sort of scenario.
Yeah, Red Dawn scenario. And this is not an existential tragedy that he won in Nevada. I got to tamp that down. And then what happens is something else pops up, and that happened after this debate.
So much, Brian. Do you believe that the former mayor of New York said that to a pregnant employee?
Well, a pregnant employee sure said that he did. Why shouldn't I believe her? I'm just really tired of this world. This one is personal for me. It really is.
But you believe
Pregnancy
that you believe he's that kind of person who did that?
Look, pregnancy discrimination is real. And we have gone on and on and on where people say, oh, I can't really believe the woman. Really? Why not?
Yeah.
Mayor Bloomberg has non-disclosure agreements for who knows how many women. And it's not just the one. The whole point is How can you actually trust someone who will not just say, look, I'm going to waive on non-disclosure on sexual harassment and discrimination. Anybody who has a story to tell can come tell
Sure, I
their
agree
story.
with everybody deserves a credible response when they make a charge like that. My question about him, you believe he's lying?
I believe the woman.
Do you believe he's
Which
lying?
means he's not telling the truth.
And why would he lie? Because just to protect himself.
Yeah, and why would she lie? I mean, that's the question, Chris. Why do you assume
it's a striking
that
event.
he's
and
the
I just
guy?
want to make sure you're clear about this. You're confident of your accusation.
Look, all I know is what she said and what he said. And I've been on her end of it in the sense of discrimination based on pregnancy.
What is stunning about this is his lack of credulity. Like, but why would he lie about this?
Just to be clear, it's because it's an enormously embarrassing event, which is damaging for his career. So you're suggesting he'd lie to protect himself?
Like,
there's something that's not jibing here.
Something like the idea that he has locked these people into a legal contract that could literally break them in half financially. That's not an indication that he wants something not revealed.
I think Warren made a mistake here by focusing on the believe women thing, though. Like, I think that's an important slogan, I guess, the thing behind it, but it's limited. Right. And especially in this case, there are other people who witnessed this happening.
Right. That's what she should have leaned into.
Right.
She said this,
to her work.
Yes, this is, you know what? That's a really important point. Dude, this isn't he said, she said. Fair point. There's a contemporaneous witness confirming to the T. So the question is, Chris, actually, we're not doing he said. So either you haven't done the research to properly know the facts of the case, or you're ignoring vital evidence to ask a question about, in a way that's different than the evidence we have.
The real question for Chris Matthews is, why don't you believe her?
Right. Well, that's the point. I mean, I think, maybe Warren could have made the case, but it doesn't. But the point of this exchange is that it doesn't matter what the case that Warren is. Chris Matthews is so far away from believing that this exists that he can't even he
doesn't think there's things to look up on the internet about it. It seems like.
But the point is that he's so far experientially away. Now, I don't expect him to have been subjected to pregnancy discrimination, but he's not just questioning this. He's ignored this existence of this phenomena for decades. That's the only way that you could be sort of like surprised in any way that could have actually gone on. I mean, that's the part that really sort of stunning to me. That it's, at the very least, like, it's not equally believable that he would lie versus she would lie? What? Like, why would you lie about this to a billionaire when you're first of all, I think to the extent that we know, I don't know if we know her words. I don't know if we've actually heard the victim's words. We only know that contemporaneous thing, at least from that magazine piece. It was someone who overheard the conversation. That other woman is bound by an NDA. And I think, like, all Warren's calling for is not a release from the NDAs about trade secrets about the Bloomberg terminals. It is release from the NDAs of any sexual assault or sexual harassment cases. I mean, seriously? And Bloomberg won't say yes, and you find it just impossible to believe that this guy could actually be lying?
He told you the NDAs were consensual. The harassment, maybe not so much.
Let's also, Chris Matthews is the same guy who, the reason the clip was so funny was that he was actually sad. I won't do the impression. It was a serious point. He was emotionally upset for Bernie Sanders calling our political process corrupt. Yeah. Like, there are deep beliefs here across a variety of areas that are being upset.
Yeah.
You know what? He rules. I think he needs to keep on doing exactly what he's been doing on television where everyone can see.
Why would he lie?
Illustrative.
What possible reason could he have to lie in a moment like this? It'd be corrupt. Why would they lie? Why would they do that? Tip O'Neill wouldn't do that. He and Reagan used to have cigars together. Careful, Elizabeth. Careful.
I really want to talk about this coronavirus stuff because this is going to be important. And if the coronavirus, first of all, I think it's extremely hard to believe that the coronavirus will not have some impact on this country, whether it's domestically we have restrictions on travel or whatever it is, or that we won't have drugs that we need because of shutdowns in production in places like Italy or places like South Korea or places like China. We're going to be impacted in some fashion by coronavirus. And this administration has been vigilant in ignoring any potential problems that could arise from this because they don't want to draw attention to the fact that they are woefully underprepared and that they have cut much of the funding that for the instruments in which we would deal with something like this. They've already pushed back on the CDC for trying to take over. Schumer was out meeting with apparently Democrats in the Senate. Here, according to, I think this actually is what Schumer wants Democrats to push the administration on. He wants the administration to appoint an independent global health czar to coordinate the response, restore the CDC's budget, which has been cut under the Trump administration, increase emergency spending for the crisis, get testing kits for all 50 states, and make sure insurance plans cover the coronavirus. Meanwhile, here's Donald Trump, and he's in India speaking on the coronavirus. If this doesn't give you confidence in this guy, I don't know what will, folks.
We're almost in between countries where people weren't going to take them and they're Americans, but they're fully quarantined. They call it fully quarantined. So, we did the right thing. If you were out there, if you were an American and you refused to have any help from your country, these were wonderful people. It wasn't their fault. So, but we're really down to probably 10. Most of the people are outside of danger right now. But we've had a very strict line on the people that would take in the areas from which we take. And I did it very early. It's never done before, and I did it early. So I think it was a good decision as it turned out. Yeah.
There he is. He's talking about corona. Now he's saying there's only 10 people. It's down to 10. Now, I don't know what it was down from. We didn't have any before, but the number is actually more than 24 Americans who have the illness as of when he issued those words. All the reporting coming out of the White House is that Donald Trump is really just concerned with the stock market dropping. The stock market has dropped, I don't know, a couple of percentage points over the past couple of days because this is going to impact the worldwide production and supply of a whole host of things, like I say, ranging from necessary drugs, antibiotics, and whatnots to things like, iPhones and more. So, of course, when you are faced with the potential of disruptions and health, dangers to our health in this country from the coronavirus, who do you send out there to calm the fears? Who do you turn to? Who does the nation look to in a moment of possible health crisis as a sober-minded person to calm our fears? Well, of course.
Minded, certainly.
Larry Kudlow.
Politico says, Larry, quote, "This sounds really, really bad." They quote the New York Times. "Americans should brace for the likelihood the coronavirus will spread to communities in the U.S., the CDC warned Tuesday. Dr. Nancy saying it's not so much a question of if this will happen, but a question of when. They're warning Americans for significant disruption to their daily lives, Larry.
Well, look, our public health people who are spectacular, the best in the world, are preparing for any eventualities, and that's exactly what they should do. They were ahead of the curve on the travel bans. Now they're ahead of the curve insofar as laying out potential emergency plans. That doesn't mean it's going to go into effect, but they're doing exactly what we're doing. We're going to get a supplemental. We've asked for
Pause it for 1 second. Can we just look at the graph they put next to it? It's just like literally dropping as he speaks. In other words, they were great with the travel ban. The travel ban was just a way of discriminating against Muslims.
What they're doing is what you need to do, or I think you have a cold.
And so
you
they're
wash your
doing what
hands.
we're doing. Okay.
You have a cold, you wash your hands, you make sure Muslims can't come, you do what you do.
Listen. We cut taxes. We get into a pro-growth environment. We're going to be fine with Corona.
You know, it's a
Cut
pro-growth environment, and look at record African American.
Reagan had the recipe. Good.
Out potential emergency plans. That doesn't mean it's going to go into effect, but they're doing exactly what we're doing. We're going to get a supplemental. We've asked for a supplemental up on the Hill of $2 billion or so. That's exactly what they were doing. I just want to say, though, as far as the U.S. is concerned, when you look at this, I mean, you had a little higher head count on the infections because of the cruise ship people coming off. We have contained this. We have contained this, I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight. We've done a good job in the United States. Hats off to our public health people.
Yeah, we've contained it. We've contained it. It's so airtight. It's like, it reminds me of like
You know, I see that's the airtight seal. I went, it's not anymore.
Now
the air is out. And then it goes pop, pop, in my tummy.
Looks like he's already had the coronavirus today.
Yeah, he's looking.
I survived. Look, first of all, listen. I had Ebola in the 1980s. I had SARS. I had Corona, and I still made money.
Or maybe the Budweiser virus.
No, it's amber liquid.
I'm actually going to check myself in for the coronavirus myself. Best practices. I think I have it.
Be back in 3 weeks.
I'll be back in about 5 weeks because the coronavirus hitting me real bad.
Right now, masks on Amazon are being price gouged.
Because hospitals are literally going there to fill supply that they can't get from their normal supply.
And what happens too is I'm not in a mask because I have my coronavirus medicine, which is Grey Goose. And I can't get it through the mask. It's my medicine that kills the virus.
Take,
you gotta douse it.
Is it take orally every 30 minutes?
Oh. So the administration wants to has put in a budget for the CDC of something like $2.5 billion for the Trump administration, and Schumer wants $8.5 billion because this is going to be a problem. And this is, and I should say, Trump's funding for that $2.5 billion takes about takes $500 million away from fighting Ebola. Right? So maybe that's not, we should be a little concerned about it. This is an issue which the Democrats at that debate should have brought up. There was opportunity to talk about it. They talked around a little bit. Matt Stoller has a really interesting piece on his Medium page, I guess. I don't even know how to talk about that. But he quotes John Stokes, who looks into sort of these type of sort of like extreme sort of situations, and saying that it's in all likelihood, we will in all likelihood be locking down travel in some areas of the U.S. for several weeks, as they did in China. People may be advised against gathering in large groups. It's not clear what any of this will mean for campaigning or primary voting, whether most of us will vote by mail or have our votes delayed. We don't know. And then he goes on to write an interesting piece where he suggests that the coronavirus is going to introduce economic conditions with which few people in modern America are familiar. The prospect of shortages. This is highly likely. It's just a question of how widespread it's going to be. He says, after 25 years of offshoring and consolidation, we now rely on overseas production for just about everything. China shut down much of its production. South Korea and Italy will shut down. This coronavirus will reveal, in other words, a crisis of production, one that's coming just in time for the presidential campaign. Now, the thing is that final imports, we're not feeling it because it's a lagging indicator, right? The stuff works its way through the supply chain, essentially, and then at one point it runs out. He goes on to talk about John Kenneth Galbraith suggesting that we have lived under a political framework known as affluence. As an affluent society, America automatically produces a surfeit of jobs and wealth. The problem is solely one of distributing the bounty. Affluence politics is not the politics of being wealthy, though, but rather the politics of not paying attention to what creates wealth in the first place. He is suggesting here that we're going to go through a period where suddenly we become aware of shortages and that we're going to have to be conscious of like where stuff is coming from. He writes, it's likely Democrats will use this opportunity to further their case for Medicare for all. Pandemic surveillance and medical bureaucracies focused on billing do not mix well. Stories about astronomical out-of-pocket costs for COVID-19 testing are already circulating. Republicans are likely to take a more xenophobic approach, emphasizing restrictions on foreigners and infected Americans. And he goes, when it comes to managing shortages, however, both parties are split between the Wall Street factions that assume affluence and the less mature populist factions that seek assertive public power. So the idea is, he says, regardless, the end of affluence politics means focusing on whether medicine is on shelves, not bitter disputes over bloated and wasteful hospital and insurance billing departments. It means caring about bureaucratic competence in government and accuracy in media, not because these are nice things to have, but because they are necessary to avoid immense widespread suffering. It means understanding that pharmaceutical mergers that benefit shareholders while laying off scientists are destructive, not just because they're unfair, but because they make us less resilient to disease. Finally, it means recognizing that wealth, real wealth, is not defined by accounting games on Wall Street, but the ability to meet the needs of our own people. Someone's going to get to this first. And it's either going to be the Democrats or the Republicans.
Well, the Republicans already got there. We listened to Tucker Carlson talk about how wokeness is killing people.
Well, they're there on the xenophobia part. But I'm talking about the part of an understanding that we need to have production in this country for vital necessities, and that there needs to be competence within the context of government.
And that Trump could very easily, he would be lying, but this could be the next phase of his fake populism. We don't make drugs here anymore. It's bad, folks.
Yep.
And I just, may I just add just one other sort of, because I love that Stoller piece, because that's the perfect example of, I think, giving great context of the failures that led to Trump and then how Trump could exacerbate them. And there's a book that I read in college, which I'm sure is somewhat, it's dated because it came out in 2001, but it's been called Portrayal of Trust, The Collapse of Global Public Health by Laurie Garrett. And she talks about how, starting with Reagan, the United States, which was a pioneer in getting rid of cholera and dealing with tenement outbreaks and all these other, very strong public health efforts, have been just gutted. And she traced in India in the 90s, there was I can't pronounce it. There was a plague, basically, a controlled plague in India of a disease that was easily treatable with, could have been preventatively treated, but public health was just starved as a systemic policy because of austerity, basically. So this is another chicken coming home to roost of decades of failed policy,
neoliberalism as a mass killer.
Going back to Reagan, in particular. And that familiar dynamic where the Republicans make the biggest incursions, but the Democrats don't ever actually reverse it. And I remember the most frustrating thing about that book was Bill Clinton had a blurb on it. Of course, came out like right when he was leaving office. And he was just, this is really alarming, incredibly important. It's like, oh, well, okay, Bill. 8 years.
Also, I read an article in The Atlantic going through the reasons why a lot of companies don't make vaccines, because for various reasons they're costly and tough to make a profit on.
Right.
That seems like red meat for Bernie Sanders.
Right. Well, I mean, at one point, Elizabeth Warren had started off this campaign by talking about making generic drugs, and I think you could do that the same thing with vaccinations.
The private sector is not doing well with this.
I mean, imagine everyone with asthma all of a sudden having like super cheap, just state-provided asthma medication. Like how good that would be electorally in the future.
Totally. And we know that also that one of the reasons that certain diseases do have outbreaks like that migrate from poor areas is because there's no business incentive to treat them whatsoever.
So lastly, in terms of coronavirus, there's a growing sense, I think, that this could be both a major public health crisis and broadly a public crisis. I think there's also a lot of people are starting to realize like this is going to be a political crisis for somebody. And the question is, who is it going to be a political crisis for? It should be a political crisis for the Trump administration and the Republicans that prop it up, cutting the CDC budget instead of expanding it, dealing with things like, climate change. We don't know to what extent climate change increases the virulence of viruses and whatnot. Here's John Kennedy from Louisiana, Republican, trying to make sure that he's not one of the guys who's going to get blamed for that. I mean, that's what this is, right? This is, both exposing the incompetence of the Trump administration. And remember, Democrats will be out there and saying, like, the reason why this guy is acting DHS head and is such a rookie is because Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate, people like Susan Collins, people like Cory Gardner, people like Martha McSally, people like Tom Tillis, people like Sonny Perdue, or the Georgia Congress people, senators. They're not doing their job in making sure that the Trump administration puts in competent people, because the Democrats have no power to do anything about this. And here he is talking to Chad Wolf, the acting, maybe one could say the pretending head of the DHS.
Do we have enough respirators?
To my knowledge, we do. I'm focused on making sure that our operators at DHS make sure that they have the protective equipment. I know HHS, as part of the supplemental.
Well, we just heard testimony that we don't.
Testimony from?
In a briefing.
Okay.
So you're head of Homeland Security.
For medical professionals or for sorry, I don't understand the question.
You're head of Homeland Security. Do we have enough respirators or not?
For patients, I don't understand the question.
For everybody, every American who needs one, who gets the disease.
Again, I would refer you to HHS on that.
Mr. Secretary,
my budget supports.
You're supposed to keep us safe.
My budget supports the men and women
you're
of the Department of Homeland Security.
You're the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yes, sir.
And you can't tell me if we have enough respirators.
What I would tell you is that the budget, my budget, our operations are focused not only on the men and women of DHS, making sure they're protected to do their jobs, to screen individuals coming in. We're working with HHS, CDC, and their budgets
know the answer, do you?
to ensure that they have enough medical equipment.
Do we have enough face masks?
We, for the Department of Homeland Security, we do.
I'm not asking for the Department of Homeland Security.
Are you looking?
I'm asking for the American people.
For the entire American public?
Yes.
No, I would say probably not.
Okay, how short are we?
Probably not.
I don't have that number offhand, Senator. I will get that for you.
Okay.
Look forward to that.
But I want to be sure I understand. Somebody
Yes, sir.
is doing modeling
Yes, sir.
on how many cases we're anticipating. You're
Yes,
just
sir.
not aware of them.
You're asking me a number of medical questions that
I'm asking
CDC
you questions
and
because you're
HHS
Secretary of
are
the
focusing
Department
on.
of Homeland Security, and you're supposed to keep us safe.
Yes, sir.
And you need to know the answers to these questions.
And
How far away are we from getting a vaccine?
In several months.
Well, that's not what we just heard testimony about.
Okay.
Who's on first here?
HHS is
What's
the
on
lead
second?
federal agency for the coronavirus response.
You're telling me we're months away from having a vaccine. That's your testimony as Secretary of Homeland Security.
What I have been told by HHS and CDC, yes.
And have you probed that to make sure that's accurate?
Yes. We continue every day. We have task force meetings.
Yeah, right. Lying. For those of you who are not my age, that who's on first, what's on second. Do you guys know what that is?
I do. I seen this in a doctor's office once on a poster.
That's so sad. Huh? Marx Brothers? Wrong. You just did that on purpose, right? Okay. Michael, do you know what it is?
Laurel and Hardy.
Wrong.
Oh, really?
Jamie.
Something my mom likes to do as a bit.
Abbott and Costello. Abbott and Costello.
We
I
have
mean, I
the
figured
brief.
she got it from somewhere.
We have the briefing that was referred to where we heard that the evidence we're very close to a vaccine. If we want to hear that.
All right, here's the briefing.
Those with Ebola, when they were brought here, were quarantined, and all of the Americans also survived, right?
But the
pause it. No,
level-
this is not that briefing. This is it. What?
I was just joking. This is a Trump thing.
Oh, okay,
It's not
okay,
the
okay.
secret
So-
briefing. This is Trump at a press.
This is Trump at a press conference talking about how prepared we are for the coronavirus. Yeah, how close we are with a vaccine. Now, we've just heard the Department of Homeland Security acting Homeland Security chief say we're months away. Now, I honestly don't know if that means we're 3 months away or if we're 45 months away. Because if you say months away to someone, you could mean either.
Those with Ebola, when they were brought here, were quarantined, and all of the Americans also survived, right?
But the level of death with Ebola, at the time it was a virtual 100%.
But none of the Americans who came here.
There's a very good chance you're not going to die. It's just it's very much the opposite. You're talking about 1 or 2%, whereas in the other case it was a virtual 100%. Now they have it. They have studied it. They know very much. In fact, we're very close to a vaccine. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, he's lying. Good, close to a vaccine.
I think 7 months, 9 months is very.
We're close to a vaccine, not one for coronavirus, but we're actually just it could be a vaccine. Mention this. We've been sort of following how Modi, the prime minister of India, he is the ruler of the BJP party.
He's the head of the BJP,
and he has been
elected to a second term.
Yes, and systemically, essentially being I don't know how else to put this, outlawing Muslims, right? I mean, creating
more than that.
Yes, and everything that follows from that. In addition to essentially cutting off Kashmir, is now building detention centers that ostensibly to hold people who are foreigners. This is under a new law that has been passed as to what makes a legitimate citizen of the country.
Can I just say what it translates to is basically groups of Muslim people who have lived in India for literally centuries. Do you have your original documentation about how your ancestors immigrated to the United States handy? I don't.
Well,
it's that type of
I
thing.
do. I've been to Ellis Island, but yes.
That's very, of course.
I
do.
Well, I mean, there's some sensitivity.
Fair enough.
But yes, that's the point. And there are detention centers that are being built.
These people don't.
That's right. And detention centers are being built. Here is essentially you have
guy ripping Islamic symbols down.
Yeah, off of huge spires. And here is Donald Trump in country.
lynchings. I mean, just to kind of like give an
This
atmosphere.
is like a rolling crystal knock
This
on
is,
some level.
the BJP is analogized to the RSS, which is this broader umbrella organization, I would say, to the Southern Democratic Party with the Ku Klux Klan during the Jim Crow era in some respects.
Yeah, and the media is reporting on like what Trump ate at his meeting with Modi while all this stuff is happening.
This is a paramilitary.
And the idea that, listen, the idea that it's happening when Trump is there is extremely important and dangerous and problematic, because it is basically saying this is when theoretically the eyes of the world are on this country. The Western press, the U.S. press is here, the President of the United States. If they can do this while Trump is there, they're basically guaranteeing that no one will speak out when Trump isn't. This is, I mean, on some level, this is what is basically, this is like the equivalent of stretching, muscles in some way. They are trying to expand what they can get away with and what they can do and test the boundaries of what the rest of the world will tolerate in terms of their oppression of Muslims.
Yeah, Trump's probably jealous.
Well, here he is. Basically, he's being asked about Modi's Muslim discrimination, and here's his response.
Ali Maqbool from BBC. There were some back home that were hoping you would raise concerns about some of these policies that Prime Minister Modi's introduced that discriminate against Muslims, and also about a rise in hate crimes here in India. But as someone
well, we did discuss that, and we discussed that, and specifically Muslims, and we also discussed Christians.
But someone
I had a very powerful answer from the Prime Minister. We talked about religious liberty for a long period of time in front of a lot of people, and I had a very, very powerful answer. And as far as Muslims are concerned, as he told me, I guess they have 200 million Muslims in India, and a fairly short while ago they had 14 million. And he said that they're working very closely with the Muslim community.
Pause it for 1 second. Now break this down. Like you get an outline of what is said. I mean, he's giving us a clue here of what was said there. First off, Trump wants to talk about religious liberty because that is a sop to the right-wing Christians in this country. And we're starting to see that, right now, I think the Supreme Court is looking at a case involving foster parenting by gay couples as to whether the Catholic Church, who runs an adoption agency, can deny adoption to couples of same-sex couples. I mean, that's just one thing that's going on there, but this is a big thing on the right. And the idea that he pivots to, we're just talking about Christians, and then he pivots back. And he gave me a very strong answer. He doesn't say what the answer was, but we can hear what the predicate of that answer was, which is we're having a demographic explosion of Muslims. We used to have 14 million. Now we have 200 million. And then, so I think reasonable people can guess what comes after that. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah, like he says it like that is a self-evident problem.
By the way, he's talking in a span of over centuries, just incidentally. Like that's another part of, like, you're talking about the whole concept. Like he's talking like the Moguls. Like, we have a concept of this country that you don't fit in. There's also recent legislation. Some of it is relatively progressive, but basically saying, like, we'll accept people fleeing religious persecution in India, except for Muslims. So as an example, you're fleeing the Burmese genocide that's being implemented right now and you're a Rohingya. No.
Continue.
A while ago, they had 14 million, and he said that they're working very closely with the Muslim community.
But so you yourself have been criticized for policies that have discriminated against Muslims, like the travel ban. There's also been a rise in hate crimes over the last couple of years in the US. So are you in a position to talk to him about those subjects?
Yeah, I won the travel ban, as you probably know. A lot of people said I lost it. No, I won the travel ban, and we use the travel ban where we think there's, not based on religion, but where we think there's going to be trouble, where we're looking at certain countries. As you know, we added a few countries onto it. but we won the travel ban, and we won it in the Supreme Court. So the travel ban is not a thing against Muslims. It's a thing against areas where we don't want people coming into our country that are going to cause problems, cause harm, cause death, hurt our people. And I feel very strongly about that.
There you go. It's very disturbing. Lastly, let's play this Project Veritas. They're at it again, folks. Project Veritas. That's what that Daily Beast thing with the locked Twitter account that they did with that guy who worked at Bernie. That's what struck me as.
I don't know. James O'Keefe doing the Epstein cable news things was a better thing. Was actually good reporting. So compared to that,
Seriously.
Here is the Project Veritas ABC correspondent David Wright, who has now been suspended. Apparently, like, you're not allowed to say these things off air. Exposes ugly truth about
You
Howard.
consider yourself a Democrat socialist? Yeah.
More than that, I consider myself a socialist.
I feel like it's like the truth suffers. The voters are poorly informed. Our bosses don't see an upside in doing the job that we're supposed to do, which is to speak truth to power and hold people to account.
Pause it. Oh my God, this is disgusting. This socialist wants to hold people in power to account? To inform voters? Good thing they broke this wide open.
Like the truth suffers. The voters are poorly informed. Our bosses don't see an upside in doing the job that we're supposed to do, which is to speak truth to power and hold people to account.
People in New York are constantly, I think, fascinated by how can people like Donald Trump, how can people understand? No. Cross the Hudson now and then and come out and spend some time, and you'll hear why. You know.
Pause it. So now we have an ABC executive who says people need to get out of their bubble to understand what's going on in the country.
And he's a Democrat or a socialist.
No, this is a different guy. That was the second guy was a different guy. Yeah. I mean, that sounds pretty...
All these people should get...
Everything they said makes sense, and I just want to say...
They should all get promotions.
I don't like... I do think we should shy away from blame the electorate as much as possible, but if it's the same guy saying people are misinformed, and a big reason is because we're sucking at our jobs, awesome.
Yes,
exactly. That's the whole frigging point. These people are giving me much greater faith.
Colleague of mine on Kobe Bryant. He said that all of his daughters died in a helicopter crash. That was it. He just fucked up. And got bad information and reported bad information.
I think that's about tweeting that or something about like Rick Fox died erroneously or whatever. But.
No, initially the story broke that on Twitter that Kobe Bryant and all of his daughters were on the helicopter, and it turned out to be
Fox
one.
Too, yeah.
And
what's the point of showing that? Like, we already know that they messed it up at first.
Well, he's saying like somebody.
He's saying it with a
up.
swear word this time.
Yeah, here we go.
He has paid the price for it. He got suspended. But, you know. I don't know. The fake news abounds. Like the problems with the truth these days.
We don't hold him to account. We also don't give him credit for what things he does do. It became like...
All right, so pause it. So understand, he said, look, fake news abounds, which I think is a statement of reality. You would want everyone to know this. He's not talking like we're manufacturing news at ABC. Then he goes, we don't hold Trump to account. We also don't give him credit. In other words, we're not doing, a good job on both the negatives and the pros and the cons.
We're basically focused on irrelevancies.
Right.
But when you put it over menacing music, it seems a lot worse.
It does.
Things he does do. It became like a profit center, a promotion center. Like, you can't watch Good Morning America without there being a Disney princess or a Marvel Avenger appearing. It's all self-promotion. Right. And promotion of the company, and also promotion of
Capitalism.
within the company.
Plus, you know what this is like? This is just like literally. I don't know what's supposed to be the scandal here, that he works at ABC and he has a critical opinion of the news media?
They think embarrassing ABC is like a political winner for them. Like,
It
that's
also-
the work.
Do
They
they
got him.
know
The people got him.
that they're spreading left critiques of
That's
the
the
media?
thing. Is this is all like black pilling people or red pilling people on to socialism, because the guy, it starts off with I'm a democratic socialist, and then here's all of this reasonable critiques.
Right,
of the
and they
media
got suspended.
that you all have.
Yeah, that I'm at a cocktail party talking about.
I'll even use the phrase fake news.
So here's what happened: is that some right wing propagandists found conscientious and responsible journalists still existing in ABC News, which is the part that shocks me. They spoke freely at some type of cocktail function, and then ABC proved all of their critiques by suspending them.
I mean, well, maybe there's more. Hold on, there could be more. Go ahead.
Is incompatible with news.
Yes.
And I still think that we don't understand that.
I don't think we're terribly interested in that. We're all guilty of the same thing. Yeah. I think that all these big news organizations, like I'm speaking about broadcast television, ABC, CBS, NBC, and we recognize that we're dinosaurs and we're in danger of dying. We're not disciplined enough to cut them off, and we second guess ourselves because we're sensitive to the accusation that we're in the tank for the Democrats, and so like that enables it. And so we enable him, and then like it feels like every time we take debate on the outrage, we enable him. He's the nightmare spouse that you can't win an argument with.
Yeah, why don't you like him?
So the guy has basically said, is exposed ABC as not holding Trump to account because we don't have the faculties to do so. I personally don't like him because he's a dick. And
David Wright is awesome.
I mean, first off, this sort of feels like something that you could more or less, if you invited him onto a conversational podcast about journalism, he would have said the same thing. He's critiquing the whole media explicitly.
Well, I guess they might be trying to show that the mainstream news is full of secret communists or something.
I guess, but then they're basically taking their critique of the media as gospel. Right? So it's like so essentially what they're saying is that the critique of the media is most honest by those who hold a belief that the media should be decommercialized. I don't think I could disagree with that. In fact, 25 minutes ago, I made the same point about the debates, that we should be decommodifying these things because it does a disservice.
But we should pretend, at least for the sake of keeping James O'Keefe sniffing around the right places, that, oh no, James, please don't keep investigating the broadcast networks.
Right.
And go back to like Democratic staffers.
Ooh, don't go and find out who the corporations are who own this and what they're paying in taxes and how much they influence their reporting.
Definitely don't look
Would
around
not want
corporate
that.
news destroying journalism. But look, as of these tapes, we should have a reinstatement campaign for these journalists. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
Outrageous. This isn't, I mean, I'm used to these cases where it's like, really? You're going to fire somebody over that? That's ridiculous. This one is more like they should promote them.
What do you think they fired him for? Was it because he was swearing?
Suspended. I don't know why.
Suspended for swearing at a cocktail party?
Saying Trump is a dick.
Having opinions.
Saying he's a socialist, critiquing how they operate. I have no idea.
Yeah, I could see that getting someone fired.
There's another fact-checking error or lie going on at PolitiFact. This Bernie Sanders was mentioning this Lancet study about how Medicare for All would save money. And they say, like, well, there is a study that says that. We'll go down to this next tweet with Grim here. And you can read the Our Ruling thing here. Sanders said in a recent study suggests Medicare for All would save $450 billion annually and save 68,000 lives. That study does exist, and it cites some evidence, but many of its assumptions are flawed, and experts uniformly told us it overestimates the potential savings. It cherry-picks data in calculating mortality effects. Now, a Yale study published in The Lancet, so...
So it's true. Grim says it's true. There was a Lancet study, but we found people who are skeptical, so therefore it's mostly false. If that's correct, it's a massive scandal, and the Lancet should retract the article. Right.
Fact-checking doesn't work under capitalism. I have a really long thread about this that I've updated with this, but in January 2019, you could tell they're the people that are. I've been a fact checker before. I did it in London, and all you do is go to basically think tanks, then hope that have some numbers that you can cite, and and that was at a nonprofit fact checking agency where we weren't beholden to any sort of investors or anything like that. So
history is written by the victors.
They're trying to sink a specific presidential candidate.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 702.
Hey, Sam?
Yes.
Hey, it's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas. What's on your mind?
Hey, just got out of the gym, doing my workout. It was really funny because I went to go caucus. I was a precinct captain, the Bernie precinct captain of my precinct.
Nice.
Small precinct, but yeah. Also, I got interviewed on Brazilian television or some radio station. It was pretty great. I asked him about Lula. He liked Lula and everything. It was just fucking cool. I mean, it was really
awesome.
good. No, it was awesome. But some interesting takeaways before I get into what I want to talk about. Just where we were caucusing alone, it did not surprise me. There was a lot of people going from Warren to Buttigieg. And that kind of confirmed, hey, they got some crossover appeal here. They're all fighting for the same guys. There's no one's really. I almost think anybody who's left for Warren, they're in that camp. They're not. The left has gone with Bernie. That's it. It's done. This conversation's even over. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There was a lot of crossover there. I noticed that, and that was really interesting to me. There was a little app. I don't want to say look, I'm not trying to start conspiracy theory here, but there was some app trouble. Then we got over it. You know what I'm saying? And that was that. It was heavily for Bernie. It was great. It was just great. You know what I'm saying? And the energy was good. You can tell. You can just tell it was going to be a blowout for Bernie. I was like, yes, let's get it. It was a matter of how much. And the thing I really want to talk about is look, I kind of have a theory here about Bloomberg. First of all, Mike the bigot Bloomberg. Because this kind of ties into what happened at my caucus, actually. I was trying to convince a lady who I was caucusing with. She was going for Joe Biden. And she was like, the thing about Bernie is that, I don't like the anti-establishment talk. That really puts me off. I said, isn't it the DNC, the establishment that and this was a black woman, by the way. So I'm trying to tell her, I was like, look, didn't the DNC put Michael the bigot Bloomberg in front of you and say that's acceptable? That's the establishment.
Right.
You think that's the establishment? When you're putting Bloomberg, especially, look, I got to say this. I'm saying because just speaking as a black person, the very fact. But again, I'm a political junkie. But listen, when you put Michael the bigot Bloomberg right before the South Carolina debates, where there's a whole bunch of black people and it's a black audience, that's just offensive. Because this you can't even hide this guy.
Well, I mean, the paradox is this. Is that, one, they changed the rules for him, which I don't know that they would have done for anyone else. And they probably, in their own minds, justified it because he has the resources where nobody else jumping into the election at this time would have the dollar resources. But the paradox is that that's why he's failing. Had he stayed out of the debates, had they kept the rules the same and let him avoid the debates and be able to hang it on the DNC, I suspect that he would be doing significantly better now.
Yes, and Sam, I'll say this last thing, and I'll jump. I just want your opinion on this because I think you're on the right track. Overall, he's on the downslide, and I don't think he's going to be a factor. But Sam, you mentioned in a previous, I think it was a previous one, where you're like, look, I feel like there's going to be a lot of quote unquote Democrats that are sitting on the sideline. I think Bloomberg, he's going to go down to humiliation and defeat like he should, Mike the bigot Bloomberg, but he's going to use money to kneecap Bernie, just out of petty hatred, out of humiliation, out of spite. He's not going to be a factor.
But here's the thing.
But he's one of the anti-Bernie forces.
All right, listen, I'm going to answer. I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to answer after you get off. But thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it. Look, Mike Bloomberg, I felt, was getting into the race to do that exact thing, to basically block Bernie Sanders. And it just goes to show you, like, the pitfalls of having that much cash. People are going to come at you and going to basically try and separate that cash from you, because he has done everything but kneecap Bernie Sanders. He came in, he soaked up a ton of support from Biden. He flattened the race out. I think, I don't know if you'll ever be able to look back on this, and it's very hard to sort of like assess these type of things. But I think people could come back and do some analysis and find that, like, Bernie Sanders won because if Sanders wins, it's going to be because Bloomberg came in and made it virtually impossible for everybody to coalesce around an actual anti-Bernie candidate.
Owned.
That is, honestly, that's the ultimate irony of this. In fact, I would also say that, like, Warren's crapping on Bloomberg also furthers that. He did it both by essentially kneecapping Biden. And when he kneecapped Biden, it gave Buttigieg and Klobuchar a little bit of oxygen. And then when Warren comes in and kneecaps him, it just creates a certain parity, which, you know, like, we're starting to see. And what it's going to do, what it could theoretically do, like in California, is keep everyone under the 15% threshold and mean that Bernie wins all the delegates in California.
Hell yeah.
That's nuts.
That's why it's Maoist Mike. He's a secret stalking host for Bernie.
I mean,
maybe.
That is honestly the most logical conspiracy theory of that ilk that I've heard. It's totally.
It's good to get some optimistic news about democracy, right?
It's encouraging. Calling from a 989 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh my God, you're kidding me, man.
Click.
This is Matt in Detroit.
Oh, who is it?
Matt in Detroit.
Man Detroit. Okay, what's on your mind?
Matt in Detroit.
Oh, Matt in Detroit. Okay, what's on your mind, Matt?
Yeah, Matt.
Hello?
No way, man. So yeah, dude, you guys are definitely my favorite progressive YouTube show. You guys are smarter than funny and funnier than all the other ones.
All right, well, that's very kind of you to say, Matt. I think you're right.
All right. Yeah. So on Monday's show, did you say something about how you didn't think the DNC would use superdelegates to cheat Bernie out of the nomination?
Yeah, I don't think they. Well, first of all, I don't think they're in a position to use it, but I don't think that the superdelegates will overturn the winner of the race of whoever has a plurality of the delegates. If it's like, if the disparity between number one and number two is like 5 to 6 or 7% or greater. I don't think they will. You got to remember, like, a quarter of the delegates, the super delegates, are probably going to go with Bernie anyways. But I just don't think that they would do that. No, I think they would rather, in that situation, if they were faced with that, I think they would rather just say, we're sitting it out and hopefully he'll lose. And then we will never have to deal with this problem again for another 40 years.
Oh my God, that's such a boomer take, dude. Seriously.
Well, I got news for you, guy. I'm a Gen X.
I love you, man. But oh my God, dude. Why do you think that these people will just get up to the point where they can use superdelegates to take the nomination away from Bernie and retain power and influence.
Because I
And
think
just
that
be
they
like,
will.
you know what? I don't know. Actually, you know what? Let's have Bernie have the White House for 4 years.
Because
and
I
take over
think
the
that
party.
you would have to be a complete moron to think that if you did that, your candidate would win in a general election. And then if you did that, it would be game, set, and match. That
You
it
don't
is
want to own the loss.
It is, you don't want to own the loss. And it's about risk averseness. And the bottom line is that they will take the proposition that they think is the least risky to them, which is far less risky to let Bernie win the nomination, sit it out, attempt to maybe kneecap him in the general. I don't know there's how much they can do by kneecapping, but they can certainly not extend their resources in certain areas, which could certainly hurt him. And then solidify their power and not have to worry about an insurgency like this, because it would be devastating. I mean, if Bernie Sanders goes out there, and the left will say, well, wait a second, all the bougie people stayed at home. Well, 4 years earlier, people were saying, like, candidates have a responsibility to get as many votes as they can. It's not up to the voters. It's up to the candidate to convince them. And that's the strategy they would follow. Because the reason why I think that they would do that, as opposed to overcoming the will of 40% of the of the plurality of the Democratic voters, is because you would have to be a moron to think that you could win in the general election after that. And then you would own the loss. And, God help the candidate who does that, because they're going to go down in history as the person who was solely responsible for Donald Trump winning a second term.
I think you're mostly right, but I want to add just really briefly, some of them absolutely are morons.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And secondly,
But if a quarter of those delegates
when all
are
of them
Bernie
said, other
people,
than Sanders at the debate, that they were willing to subvert a democratic process, I think they're choreographing. But I think at the end of the day, I would echo Sam in the main, though, because I think the anxiety. Look, Bernie needs to win, and he needs to win big in the primary. By the way, you also need to start thinking about him winning big in a general, because even if he beats Trump, if it's a small margin, it's already such an uphill battle for this agenda anyways. The conversation at some point, this goes with us starting to think like winners. Like, we're going to steamroll these people. They're wrong. They're on the wrong side of history. And now we have to beat the Republicans. We have to win.
The disagreement is how much we think Bernie needs to run up the margin by, because I don't think 5% is going to be enough. Like I think there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to think like we need to do something.
I think he needs to win big, and I think no one else up there is trustworthy, and I think they've proven themselves in that way again and again. I think it's Bernie verse, and I think keep acting like you're 10 points down in terms of the effort to get the wins, but the attitude and the anxiety levels start broadening the scope.
Look, I don't actually know who's right. I could see it going either of those two ways because, as Michael said, the DNC is full of morons. We know this to be true. But, I mean, the only real takeaway from this is even the possibility that they could take it from him at the convention, even following their own stupid rules, means that we need to win outright.
Of course. And in 2016, Bernie was saying that he wanted the superdelegates
Can we just say, though, let's not indulge that talking point too much, because one,
it's not a talking point, it's simply a fact.
Well, okay, but we're using it as a talking point. So just for me,
having
like,
a conversation about this.
Well,
I'm just saying that, like, it's.
But even if you want to make it let's actually. I mean, I don't know how useful it is in terms of assessing things now, but there is actually a difference in terms of the rules. Then, as far as I understand, were that, and just to be clear, I didn't support them doing this at the time, because I actually really do believe in whoever gets the most votes has to go forward, even if it's a loathsome candidate. But if I understand, then the rules were that superdelegates just had a vote, and you could argue that you're competing for superdelegates as part of the first round process, right? Versus the second round after we've already sort of negated the will of the first round, right? Like, that campaign to get its superdelegates is operating under a different rule set, where if superdelegates have a vote in the first round, and you could technically argue that you're just campaigning for votes.
Yeah, that those
Right.
people who have no, they have those people. There was far more like non-electeds, who were
Right.
super delegates at that time.
Right.
I mean, I suppose it seems to be just as anti-democratic.
I totally agree with
But
you.
it's-
That's why I
it's
wouldn't
the
go down
rules.
either role.
I mean, it's all the rules. But the bottom line is, I just think that look, I think it's not unhealthy to operate under the belief that Sanders has to win by 8, 9, 10 percentage points for there to be no question, going into that first round for him to get the nomination. But you asked me a question as to whether I think they'll do it. And I think no. I think that because you're only talking about 75% of the superdelegates at play. If Bernie has 5 or 7% more of a lead, and in terms of the delegates, I think it's hard to imagine it's going to be that close at this point. But we'll have a better sense of that, this time next week, frankly, on Wednesday of next week. But you got to remember, 25% of the superdelegates are going to vote for Bernie under any circumstance, unless I guess Bloomberg goes around and gives them each $5 million. But again, if Bloomberg goes around and gives them each $5 million, I got news for you. I'm not going to vote for the Democratic nominee. And if
there we go.
That's my threshold. But if I'm not, then you'd have to be honestly, functionally, you'd have to have not the ability to tie your own shoes to think that person's going to win.
Well, and I think
then
that,
you're going to own the loss.
And I think that
that's-
goes to the other split, which is I really do think that there are some people, in this case, definitely not a majority. I think there's some people that are morons, and I think there's some people that definitely would prefer another 4 years of Trump to Bernie. And even if they have to own the loss, look, they can still fundraise. They can still do their little games.
It's much easier for them to go out and think that they can tank Bernie in the general,
Right.
rather than
Right.
own it
True.
outright.
True.
Because
Absolutely.
doing nothing, the absence of doing something is much easier to cloak than to go out and actually.
And Corbyn just sort of showed them what their dream come true would be.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
but
And what
Bernie
we
Sanders
need
is
Appreciate
not
the call.
Jeremy Corbyn. And
Thanks
I
for the
think
call,
a
Matt.
lot of them know that. Here's the thing the one thing that gives me pause about Sam's argument for how this is going to go. I don't know that these people really believe that Bernie's not electable. I think that's something that a lot of people said in order to torpedo him. But I think the worst case scenario for them is that Bernie wins.
Yeah, I would bet that the vast majority of them, I mean, how many people were we talking about? 300 people? And then, everybody that would have to sort of be on board with their candidate being the person, right? I think that, I think the majority of them think that he can't win. So, I mean, it's not, I think it's, maybe, I don't know, 50-50 proposition as is. And
Let's poll them.
well, yeah, but I mean, look, I think there's more people out there like Chris Matthews than we give them credit for. I think they're being sincere, but I think they're also sort of their perspective is I look at the freak out that we saw when it became clear that he was going to win the primary. Those people did not believe that he was going to win the primary.
I mean,
that
we
was a
don't know
genuine.
that.
Well, I know we
They
don't
have
know.
access to the polls. They see Bernie doing well in a head-to-head against Trump. I mean, some of them probably don't believe that he can win, but I have no idea how many.
I mean, my sense is in just sort of having exposure at least to some of these media people through email lists and whatnot, where I lurk, that I think there is a genuine belief that he cannot win. I think there is a genuine belief by a large cohort of the Democratic Party that believes that the idea that he was supportive of the Sandinistas or of Cuba is going to be disqualifying in a general election. I think they actually believe that.
I hope that you're right, and I hope they keep on believing it.
All right, we got time for one more call. Calling from a 262 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is Ian from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin.
Ian from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin.
Oconomowoc, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I said.
I was just calling because I was interested. Last night you mentioned that you had first heard of Rush Limbaugh and this, excuse me, I'm sorry, this idea of Bernie getting bought off by the Clintons.
Yeah.
And that trial balloon got inflated a long time ago because I was working a little farther north here, and a lot of people that voted for Bernie have bought into that.
Really? Where do you think they're getting that?
The area that I used to live was, there was sort of like an overlap of radio and TV areas. So you would get Limbaugh, Hannity, and all those clowns on 2 AM stations and like 1 FM station.
Yeah.
So, of course, the stations that come in when you're driving are those.
I see.
And so it's just like it's been out there. A guy I worked with, he used to, like, I talked him into Bernie, and then I talked him into Clinton, by doing the lesser of two evils thing. And after the convention and after the stuff about the DNC came out, I think he's lost. And I'm just wondering if some of those rural areas might be in that situation.
I mean, my experience
I hope the
is,
Sanders campaign is aware of it.
well, let me ask you this. Like, who is that guy for now?
Since moving, I haven't been in touch with him very much, but I think he's just disgusted. It's one of those that may not come out.
Right. Interesting.
And I've always, at least with those guys, there was a lot of conservatives, but I used to advocate for him. I was like, go vote for the down ticket. Just leave that other, leave the presidential blank if you don't like anybody.
That is the agenda. You don't put out that Bernie's bought out because you think that he's going to go and vote for Trump. That voter is going to go vote for Trump. You put that out because you want that voter to stay home. And I appreciate the call. Thanks very much.
Yep.
It also I think highlights the need in my theory that had we had 3 low-powered radio stations in Michigan and Wisconsin and in outside of in Pennsylvania, that the outcomes of that election would have been different. But I think that we cannot underestimate this too. I think it's far more likely, frankly, than the idea that they're going to be able to stop Bernie at the convention. Like I say, I would put, I don't know if the number's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or higher, but that would prevent them from doing that. But I think it's far more likely as to what you will see is, and I wouldn't put it past, I'm not convinced that the Clinton people didn't put out that stuff about Bernie and Warren's conversation, frankly. But that doesn't excuse, I think, the way that she handled it. I think she could have handled it better. But there is, I think, my point being that their willingness to crash Sanders in the general, I think you're going to see a lot of Sanders has sold out. Because he is going to move on some things. I can tell you that right now, folks. He is already starting to move a little bit on things like, a fracking ban in places like Pennsylvania.
He walked back his promise to have a total moratorium on deportations.
He walked back that there's going to be more.
And that was specifically on that was definitely going to happen. But I've noticed anecdotally in social media feeds, which whatever you take for a grain of salt, that type of thing that I see is actually always goes back to him deciding to endorse Clinton. That's the ones I see of that's when I realized he's not the real deal. He's not going to go for it. He's another whatever, and I'm not going to vote.
And there's going to be more of that. I mean, there's going to be more because Bernie Sanders is going to run in an election. And the fact of the matter is he will be, if he is nominated by the Democratic Party, the most left candidate that has been, in terms of a platform, that has been nominated by the Democratic Party or any major party, I think. I mean, I don't know, Debs, what he, but certainly within the past 100 years, let's put it that way to make it simple, and or 80 years to make it even simpler. And there is no doubt that he is to the left ideologically than, a big chunk of the voters that he's going to need to get. And, just like there was this sense of, it's Clinton's responsibility to come and get people on board. Well, it's also his responsibility to go and get the Clinton people on board now. Voters.
I think the disagreement we have is how many of the of those people he needs to get on board. I wouldn't really describe as Clinton people mostly, but regardless, he's going to need to get people on board. That's a different, I guess the reason it matters though is it's going to be a different point of emphasis on how you do get those people on board. And I think that, look, good time to follow my coverage of Lula. It's not a time for moralism and perfection, but really seizing this opportunity.
And my point being is that we're going to see a lot online that is either going to be organic or synthetic of pushing this line that Bernie is selling out. And people have to pick a couple of sort of like broad things that they like about Bernie Sanders and keep their eye on that. And keep your eye out because I guarantee you, the very least that the Trump strategy will be to do that. And I don't know how, through what vehicles they will use, but you will see YouTube accounts and Twitter accounts, and you will see, I don't know if the Green Party will show up and say, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, that he has sold out, that he has, been Clintonized or whatever it is. I don't know.
But
expect something like that.
If you get into an argument with anybody about Bernie's 3 houses, by the way, tell them to Google Bernie's 3rd house and then imagine the type of 3rd house that any one of the people leveling that critique would have after being in power as long as he has. And, I think
seriously
levels that.
I mean, I've had some talks lately with my friends in DSA about how to push Bernie on some of these issues and hold him accountable without hurting his chances of winning the primary, because we all want him to win the primary very badly.
Well, the general is pretty.
Think about the general. Don't fuck around.
As well as the general.
Most important thing.
Yeah, don't mess around with that.
Yes, we don't want to mess around with any of it. I mean, what I said was that I don't think the left has the power to really hurt or help his campaign that much at this point in time, because we just don't have that much power. But I think there are ways that we can try to do it with some public statements. I mean, it's not just the socialist left that had an issue with his immigration stance.
All right. I got to go, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know.